LoveLore Library. Chapter 832. Yili said with a smile, so what if it's just a pretense? It's fine as long as people believe it. Since it doesn't cost money, the more the better. What thousand-year blood Ganoderma, what infinite boundless mountain helping to restore the people's lives, what alliance with the Dechu state to deal with the Prince Ding mansion in the Western Tomb, as well as that illusory position of queen. Yili was indeed rambling on endlessly. But the important thing was that people believed it. Tanjiji said, when the time comes, where will we go to find Infinite Boundless Mountain for help? Infinite Boundless Mountain probably wants to tear you and Prince Ding apart right now, right? Yili said with a smile, does young Master Tan think that they can wait for more than a month? When the time comes, how will they still have the time to think about all this? When the time comes, those so-called old officials of the previous dynasty would only be thinking about how to hold on to their names. Yili didn't really intend to help Tanjiji ascend to the throne. No matter how many days he was on the throne, it would still be different. The Northern Territory would still rise and fall because of Enchanting. Tanjiji was silent for a long time, before finally sighing, Princess's methods are good. I believe that at this time, the people of the Prince Ding mansion have already infiltrated the Northern Territory army. Otherwise, Princess wouldn't have appeared to meet that Prime Minister of the Northern Territory. Yili said with a faint smile, young master overpraises me. I have no other choice. We have to break up Enchanting's power as soon as possible, otherwise there will be trouble. No matter how weak the Northern Territory was, it was still a country, and they only had so many people here. If they couldn't deal a fatal blow to it as soon as possible, by the time Enchanting reacted, they would also have to bear the consequences. Elsewhere, in a large camp not far from Prosperous City, Hisu, dressed in the garb of a general of the Northern Territory, was currently pouring wine for a few generals with a smile on his face. After 3 rounds of wine, the atmosphere in the tent gradually became more lively. One of them grabbed Hisu's arm and asked in a low voice, brother, was what you said last time true? Hearing this, not only Hisu, but the others also stopped, staring at Hisu. Obviously, the people who were talking to him were of the same mind. Hisu laughed brightly and said, although little brother is new here, I am indebted to several big brother's care. Do you think I would harm you? That may be the case, but now that we're in the Northern Army, we're constantly being ordered to beat up our own people. It was fine in the past. Mo Jingqi wasn't a good person either. If he hadn't chased away Prince Ding, would we have fallen to this state? But now, we have to fight against the Mahist army. How can we not be afraid? When the Mahist army was mentioned, the others could not help but change their expressions. Last year, they had also gone to attack Chujing. If it was not for the Mahist army coming to help, Chujing would have already fallen. Hisu smiled and said, isn't that so? Her brothers probably didn't know about it yet. Back then, the Mahist army had killed their way from Feihong Pass to the Chu capital to help the Chu capital. Along the way, the Northern Army had also suffered heavy casualties. Even when they reached the Chu capital, they still had that kind of power. Now, the Mahist army is waiting at Xijing Pass. It's good enough that they haven't killed their way out, but His Majesty still wants to provoke them. Isn't he seeking his own death by sending these innocent soldiers to their deaths? The others also deeply agreed. Hisu took in everyone's expressions and said, brothers, I won't hide it from you. Little brother has already decided to turn over a new leaf and rely on the Prince Ding mansion. In any case, we are all people of the Central Plains. Why should we work for the Northern Army? Besides, the Prince Ding mansion is known for being benevolent and righteous. They will certainly understand our difficulties and won't make things difficult for us. The others looked at each other and said with some difficulty, that's true, but we don't have a way out. The Mahist army is far inside Xijing Pass. If we want to rely on them, I'm afraid we'll be destroyed by them first. Hisu laughed in a low voice. He took out a token and said, "Brothers, look at what this is." Everyone looked. It was a black jade token with the character "Fix" carved on it. They couldn't help but tremble. Hisu said with a smug smile, "This is Princess Ding's token. Wang Fei has promised that as long as little brother turns over a new leaf, I will definitely be promoted in the future and have a bright future." The people present were jealous and envious. To be able to receive Princess Ding's jade token and promise, Hisu's good fortune was not small. "Brother, we..." The others stared fixedly at Hisu, wanting to speak but hesitating. Hisu smiled generously and said, "Brothers, don't worry. Little brother naturally will not let brothers drink the soup when little brother has meat to eat. We brothers will naturally share blessings and hardships together. Brother, he is right." Everyone praised in unison. Their gazes when they looked at Hisu became even friendlier. Hisu had infiltrated the Northern Army for less than a month. Originally, it should not have been so smooth. However, he had Queen Helan and the other nobles of the northern region, as well as the old officials of the previous dynasty, led by Prime Minister Yun, who were either actively or unknowingly escorting him in secret. Naturally, his identity was watertight, and he was like a fish in water in the army. Yili also gave him a lot of information. Qin Feng, Lin Han, and the others helped him in secret. He himself had been in the army for many years. He naturally got along well with these mid-level generals. Not long after, he circled out the people he could make friends with, rope in, and turn over. After a few intentional and unintentional probing, there were people who could not help but come to drink with him. He took the opportunity to talk about this matter. It went very smoothly. Under the night sky, a black figure sneaked out of the army camp. When he turned back to look at the quiet army camp in the night and sighed in relief, a low and laughing voice came from behind him. "Brother Huang, where are you really going?" The man in black suddenly turned back. He could not help but narrow his eyes. A person slowly walked out from the shadow under the tree. It was Hisu, who had been drinking and conspiring with him at the same table not long ago. Seeing that there was nowhere to hide, the man in black pulled down the black cloth on his face and said with a smile, "He Yen, why haven't you slept yet?" Hisu said with a smile, "Brother Huang hasn't slept yet. I don't dare. I'm afraid that I'll be executed for treason tomorrow morning." The man in black's expression changed. He said sternly, "If that's the case, you still dare to collude with others to commit treason? If you stop now, I can still let you go on account of our friendship." Hisu looked up at the sky and said with a faint smile, "Brother Huang, now. I should let you go, right? Also, my name is not He Yen. I'm the general under Princess Ding's command, Hisu." The man in black's expression became even more unsightly. He looked to the side and flew in another direction. But how could he be a match for Hisu, who was a shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion? Hisu's figure rose and fell a few times. Under the moonlight, the man in black fell to the ground, dead. You and I are just serving different masters. Even if we die, we have no regrets." Hisu sighed softly. Chapter 833. In less than a month and a half, Hisu had roped in nearly half of the troops near Chongqing. Naturally, there was a lot of bloodshed in the dark, but on the surface, it was as calm as ever. "Your Highness's methods are really admirable." In the small courtyard, Queen Helan sat in front of Yili and said with a smile. Their gazes towards Yili were filled with even more admiration. In just over a month, she could control half of the troops in Chongqing and even infiltrate the stubborn Central Plains people. Queen Helan admitted that she couldn't do it. Although she was from the northern region and was naturally hostile to the Central Plains people, Queen Helan had to admit that she probably couldn't have imagined Yili could do so much. Yili shook her head and said with a faint smile, "Your Highness flatters me. It's just a coincidence that I took advantage of the loophole. It wouldn't be so easy if it were in another place." It wasn't that Yili was modest. In fact, even Yili herself didn't expect it to be so smooth. It was really because the northern region was too loose. Although these old officials of the previous dynasty were well versed in scheming and plotting against others, they and their families were too far away from the politics and power of the court. As a result, the northern region looked good from top to bottom, but there were loopholes everywhere inside. Even if the Prince Ding mansion didn't scheme against Enchanting, if Enchanting didn't reorganize himself, the northern region wouldn't last 10 years. Queen Helan said with a smile, "Those who can seize the opportunity are smart people. However, those old men from the Central Plains are the most suspicious. You've done so many things, but they didn't notice." These days, the people of the northern region had been secretly preparing to return outside the pass after they were taken to attack Sieging Pass. On the other hand, they did their best to create trouble for the Central Plains people to distract their attention. But they didn't even notice that their military power had been taken away by others. This was too much. Could it be that all the Central Plains soldiers wanted to rebel against Enchanting? Then how bad was Enchanting's reputation? Yili played with the teacup in her hand and said with a smile, "They should find out soon. Don't forget that the Yun family also has a lot of military power. They will definitely find out that something is wrong." It had to be said that this was another mistake of Enchanting's. Or rather, it couldn't be said to be a mistake. It was something that had to be done. Princess Consort, Prime Minister Yun's residence has sent an invitation to invite Princess Consort to the residence for a chat. Shuajing walked in with an invitation and presented it to Yili. Yili took it and took a look. It was indeed an invitation from Prime Minister Yun's residence. The dazzling golden post was outlined with an exquisite pattern of auspicious clouds, and it looked rather magnificent. "Where is Tanjiji?" Yili asked. Shuajing said, "Young Master Tan was invited to the Prime Minister's residence this morning. I'm afraid the Prime Minister's residence has already discovered that something is amiss. That's why I sent an invitation to invite Princess Consort over. I want to be a turtle in a jar." Yili stood up and said with a smile, "Then let's go meet this loyal minister of the previous dynasty. Send someone to inform Hisu to pay attention to the soldiers and horses outside the city. If there are any accidents, don't be polite. In addition, let Qin Feng block all the roads to the Purple Thorns Pass. Without my order, no information is allowed to be sent to the Purple Thorns Pass." This subordinate obeys. Shuajing received the order and left. Queen Helan also stood up and said with a smile, "I have to thank you this time. I will also go back and let them prepare while cooperating with you." "Oh right, do you still want those ministers of Enchanting? Can I kill them?" Yili smiled faintly and said, "Queen, please do as you wish." She brought Shuajing and Lin Han into the Prime Minister's residence. Looking at Prime Minister Yun's smile that hit a knife, Yili didn't care. However, Tanjiji had already been restrained by someone. Yili couldn't help but smile and said, "Young Master Tan, what's wrong with you?" Yili didn't believe that with Tanjiji's ability, he could still be restrained by the people of the Prime Minister's residence when he was on guard. Tanjiji shrugged with a smile and said, "Aren't I waiting for you to come and save me?" Seeing the two talking and laughing casually, not looking down on him in the slightest, Prime Minister Yun's face couldn't help but darken. He laughed coldly and said, "This lady, why don't you tell me where you are from? Don't tell me that you are really from the infinite boundless mountain." Yili smiled faintly and said, "Since Prime Minister Yun didn't believe me from the start, why bother asking? With this, the Prime Minister naturally knew that he had indeed been fooled by the two in front of him. Yili said that he didn't believe them from the start, but that wasn't right either. He was only half believing and half doubting. It was only because Tan Jiji had a request for him and these two were also in Chongqing City, which could be considered to be under his control, that he didn't care. However, he didn't expect these two to be so capable that they could actually control half of the troops in the north in just over a month. You are from the Prime Minister's residence. The Prime Minister stared at the two and asked coldly. Other than the people from the Prince Ding mansion, he really couldn't think of anyone else who had such ability and means. Tan Jiji smiled helplessly and didn't answer. Yili nodded sweetly and said, Yili greets Prime Minister Yun. You are Princess Ding. Hearing this, Prime Minister Yun couldn't help but scream and almost fell to the ground. Yili was a little helpless. Was her name so scary? Prime Minister Yun fell back into the armchair in a daze. After a while, he sighed and said, What a Princess Ding. Such courage and means. I think the princess has been planning with those barbarians in the north for a long time, right? Prime Minister Yun wasn't a fool. The Prince Ding mansion had made such a big move in the north, but they didn't notice it until now. There must be someone helping them from the inside. Yili sighed softly and said, It's not that the Prince Ding mansion is cruel. The king of the northern region and the Northern Tribes Alliance want to destroy the Prince Ding mansion and overturn the Central Plains. This move is really too vicious. If they succeed, the Prince Ding mansion will be attacked from both sides. So, we can only take the risk and cut off their escape route. Please forgive us, Prime Minister Yun. Winner takes all. Princess, there's no need to say more. Prime Minister Yun stared at Yili's beautiful face and said sternly, Princess Ding has such courage and means at such a young age. Even I have to say that I admire you. However, since the Prince Ding mansion already knows that their status has declined, they still dare to come to the Prime Minister's residence. It seems that they don't respect me at all. Yili smiled faintly and said, Prime Minister Yun is a senior. How can I refuse a senior summons? Good, good, good. Prime Minister Yun said good 3 times in a row. He was so angry that he slammed the table and stood up. He said sternly, Since you dare to enter my Prime Minister's residence, if I don't make you stay, wouldn't the dignity of the North be lost? Prime Minister Yun, even if the North's dignity is lost, we are the ones losing face. What does it have to do with you? A female voice with a slight smile sounded from outside the door. Queen Helan walked in with a few people from the north. It was as if the entire Prime Minister's residence had entered an empty space. Prime Minister Yun's eyes narrowed. He stared at Queen Helan and said, I was wondering why you barbarians from the north would collude with the Prince Ding mansion. So it's because of you. At that time, when Queen Helan made a fuss about going to Li City, everyone thought that it was because she was angry with Imperial concubine Yun. No one cared. They didn't think that it would bring disaster to the north. Chapter 834. Queen Helan's pretty face darkened, and she said coldly, Old man surnamed Yun, you're shameless. Your master Ren Qining relied on my cousin and uncle's status and power to become the king of the northern region. That's why you old men have such a good life today. But now you're burning the bridge after crossing the river and pushing out the people of the northern region everywhere. Every time there's a war, you let the men of the northern region rush to the front while you take advantage of the situation from behind. More than 700,000 men of the northern region entered the pass, but now there are less than 300,000 people left. You can't tolerate it and push us aside everywhere. It's really disgusting. No wonder you haven't been able to restore your country for hundreds of years. It can be seen that the gods in heaven have eyes and know that you're all despicable villains. How can they let you succeed in restoring your country? Prime Minister Yun was rebuked by Queen Helan, and his face turned green and purple. The most reprehensible thing about Ren Qining's establishment of the northern region was that he used the power of the people of the northern region. And it wasn't that he had subdued the people of the northern region and made them shrewd, but that he had inherited his father-in-law's position after marrying into the northern region. In this way, it was not legitimate for them to claim to be the orthodox family of the Central Plains. Even the children of the previous queen had the surname of the people of the northern region. How could these old officials of the previous dynasty tolerate this? However, the establishment of the northern region was indeed entirely dependent on the people of the northern region. This made the old officials of the previous dynasty have two very strange feelings in front of these people of the northern region. On the one hand, they despised these barbarians of the northern region. On the other hand, they had to admit that they had received great kindness from them. Such complicated and tangled thoughts made these self-proclaimed orthodox people even more intolerant of the people of the northern region. They only wanted to find ways to drive them away as soon as possible. On the one hand, they could restore the orthodox bloodline of the Lin family. On the other hand, what the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. Humph. This old man won't argue with a woman like you. Prime Minister Yun said with an unfriendly face after being pushed by Queen Helan to the point of speechlessness. Queen Helan said disdainfully, "It's this young lady who won't argue with an old man like you." The people next to her couldn't help but twitch their mouths. Yili held back her laughter and asked, "Queen Helan, why are you here so soon?" Queen Helan waved her hand and said, "Many of Ren Qining's people in the city have been caught. Those who haven't been caught can't run out now. They are also fighting outside the city. Princess Ding, can your people win?" Yili said indifferently, "Remove the word what. Since they've started fighting, what are you doing here instead of staying in the palace?" Queen Helan sighed. "I heard that this old man has hidden a lot of people in his mansion to deal with you. If I knew you were so confident, I wouldn't have come. I'll go back first." Since he had something to do in the palace, King Helan came quickly and left quickly. Having just scolded Prime Minister Yun and lost the resentment in her chest, Queen Helan walked with the wind under her feet. As Queen Helan came and went, Prime Minister Yun's face became even more ashen. Yili sat across from him, calmly looking at his face that seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. She faintly said, "Yun Xiang, I don't want to commit the sin of killing. Please give the order for your subordinates to stop. All of you have worked hard for so many years. Why don't you lay down your burdens and enjoy your old age?" Prime Minister Yun sneered. "I've long heard that Qi Lin of the Prince Ding mansion is mysterious and unfathomable. No one can stop him. Presumably, this old man's small prime minister mansion is now completely under the control of the princess. Why does the princess still pretend?" Yili faintly smiled and didn't refute. She waved her hand and let people take him away. Chongqing City was in chaos. Queen Helan ordered people to close the palace gate, arrested many of Ren Qining's old officials, and sealed the city gate. Outside the city, the troops under Hisu's command fought with the troops under Ren Qining's former subordinates again. Chongqing City was in a mess both inside and outside. At the same time, the news of the internal strife among the Central Plains troops in Chongqing City reached Ren Qining's troops far away in Zijing Pass within a few days. Ren Qining led nearly 1 million troops to besiege the Purple Thorns Pass. Although his opponent was still Ling Huai, this time it was more troublesome than last time. Last time, Ling Huai's troops were the troops of Dechu State. The two sides were in a standoff for several months. Now, it was the Mahist army that was famous for their bravery. Moreover, Ling Huai had a grudge against Ren Qining for his son's death. Last year, when Ren Qining attacked the Chu capital, Ling Huai's eldest son, Ling Qingyu, died in battle and died for his country. How could Ling Huai not remember such a great grudge? The two armies had fought dozens of times in front of the Purple Thorns Pass, but the army of the northern region had never even touched the gate of the pass. The war here was not going well. Enchanting also received urgent letters from Yi from time to time. In the letters, it was obvious that he was dissatisfied with the duties and responsibilities of the army of the northern region. This already gave Enchanting a headache. Enchanting was so angry that his vision turned black. Bastard! Slapping down the letter in his hand, Enchanting couldn't help but curse. However, the reactions of the generals in the tent were different. Enchanting's trusted subordinates were naturally worried and anxious, while the generals from the northern region acted as if this matter had nothing to do with them. They couldn't wait to see Enchanting make a fool of himself. How could Enchanting not know what these people were thinking? He secretly suppressed the anger in his heart before sending these people out. These generals of the northern region naturally knew that Enchanting didn't like them, so they didn't care. They all stood up and turned to leave the tent. In the tent, the general of the Central Plains who stayed behind saw Enchanting's expression and hurriedly asked, "Your Majesty, did something happen in the royal city?" Enchanting gritted his teeth and said, "The cavalry of the Central Plains who stayed behind to guard the camp rebelled." Everyone was stunned and couldn't react for a moment. If it was the soldiers of the northern region who rebelled, they could believe it. But the soldiers of the Central Plains rebelled. But then again, there were less than 50,000 soldiers of the northern region who stayed near the royal city. It was probably impossible for them to rebel. But those people of the northern region didn't rebel. Instead, it was their own soldiers who rebelled. This was truly inconceivable. "Your Majesty, could it be a trap?" someone asked suspiciously. Enchanting raised his hand and pressed on the area between his eyebrows that was aching faintly. He said, "This is no small matter. The royal city is related to the lifeline of our army. There are more than 500,000 soldiers left behind. If they attack us from behind, they will attack us together with Leng Hui from the front and back. Our army will be in a difficult situation and may even be homeless. Could it be the people of the Prince Ding mansion who are causing trouble?" Enchanting sneered. Of all times, something happened at this time. If it's not the Prince Ding mansion, who else could it be? What a Prince Ding mansion, what a Mahist army. Everyone present looked at each other with worry on their faces. Their million-strong army had besieged the Bauhinia Pass for more than a month, but they hadn't made any progress. If Chongqing fell into the hands of the Prince Ding mansion, then they would be done for. Not to mention other things, the rations of more than 1 million soldiers was enough to give them a headache. They would starve to death in less than 3 months. "Your Majesty, since the royal city has already sent people to ask for help, I'm afraid they can't hold on any longer. We have to quickly return to quell the rebellion." Although it was important to form an alliance with the northern tribes to attack the Bauhinia Pass, it wasn't as important as their own territory. If the royal city was really taken over by the rebel army, then they would have nothing left. By then, even if Leng Hui allowed them to enter the Bauhinia Pass, what could they do after entering? Become refugees. Chapter 835. Enchanting understood such an important issue, so did his subordinates. After pondering for a moment, he still appointed a general to lead 200,000 troops back as reinforcements. On the other hand, it was also a test. Enchanting, who had dealt with King Ding's residents several times, had a deep understanding of Mo Xiuyao's unconventional way of playing his cards. Since King Ding's residence was involved in this matter, he had to be careful of the formalities. After settling the matter of reinforcements to quell the rebellion, Enchanting sighed and wrote a few letters. He called his subordinates and ordered, "Hand the letters to the princess and the prime minister personally." Chongqing City, Northern Region Palace. Now Chongqing City was controlled by the Northern Region people, and there was a chaotic battle outside the city. The whole palace suddenly became Queen Helen's world. Queen Helen invited Yili to live in the palace, so that she would not have to go out of the palace to find her if anything happened. Yili did not care. Now Chongqing City was not only controlled by the northern region people, but also secretly controlled by the Mahist army. Even a fly could not fly out. The Mahist army also began to secretly clean up Renqining's secret forces according to the distribution of Renqining's secret forces provided by Queen Helen. These were probably collected by the former queen, who was worried that the forces of the Central Plains would threaten her son's position in the future. She did not want to use them on the Prince Ding mansion. Ding Wangfei, take a look at this. Queen Helen lazily sat in the large phoenix chair, waving the letter she had just received in her hand as she looked at Yili with a smile. Yili raised her head, put down the scroll in her hand, and raised her eyebrows. What did the northern region king say to the queen? Queen Helen said with a smile, he said that the soldiers rebelled and he was worried about my safety. He also said that I must be careful and stay in the palace and not wander around, so as not to have an accident. What else? He probably wants to ask my father and the other tribal leaders of the northern region what they think. Yili nodded and smiled. He probably wants to test your attitude. Queen, read the reply letter. A reply. Queen Helen blinked and looked innocently at Yili, but the messenger he sent has been killed by me. Yili smiled indifferently, that's the queen's business. If the queen doesn't want the 200,000 soldiers to come back, you can also ignore him. Queen Helen helplessly slumped her shoulders. While looking for a brush and ink to write a reply to Renqining, she said, Princess Ding, you're so bad. Yili laughed and said, did I tell the queen that I'm a good person? Queen Helen ground her teeth. Can you not call me queen? Of course, Princess Helan, Yili agreed readily. Queen Helen angrily buried her head and wrote a letter to Renqining. The letter was clean and straightforward, stating that the rebellion of the Central Plains had nothing to do with the Northern Territory. If she wanted her father to help, she had to give them satisfactory conditions. When she finished writing, Yili came over to take a look and added a few strokes. Copy it again. Although Queen Helen was only slightly proficient in the language of the Central Plains, she could still see that Yili's letter contained some faint affection. She could not help but shudder. Princess Ding, don't slander me. This lady doesn't like that ungrateful bastard. Yili raised her eyebrows and said, haven't you always acted like this? Now that you suddenly turn hostile and show no mercy, it will make Renqining suspicious. Previously, in order to not make Renqining suspicious, Queen Helen was always at odds with imperial concubine Yun, faintly showing a jealous appearance. Renqining was very astute. If Queen Helen suddenly showed a completely businesslike attitude, it would easily arouse Renqining's suspicion, and he would not let go of the 200,000 soldiers. All right then, I'll suffer for a while. Queen Helen had to admit that Yili thought more thoroughly than she did, so she could only pick up the pen and copy the letter again. Helen, come out. Queen Helen was bitterly copying the letter to Renqining when a sharp and angry voice came from outside the door. The ear-piercing voice caused Queen Helen's hand to pause, and the half-written letter was immediately stained with a large amount of ink. Queen Helen's face immediately darkened, and she loudly said to the door, let them in. In a short while, Imperial concubine Yun angrily rushed in with a few women. They were trapped in the palace and did not know what was happening outside. They were just forbidden to go in and out every day, and they were cut off from contact with the outside world. After enduring for so many days, Imperial concubine Yun finally could not endure any longer. So she brought people to Queen Helen's place to cause trouble. In the end, she was Renqining's favored concubine, and Queen Helen did not let anyone do anything to her. Also, most of the attendants in the palace were from the Central Plains. When the time came, she rushed to the entrance of Queen Helen's palace. Helen. What do you mean? You dare to not let my people out of the palace, do you want to rebel? Queen Helen put down her pen and looked at her with a faint smile. That's right, what do you want? How dare you? Imperial concubine Yun screamed, are you not afraid that His Majesty will come back and kill you? Queen Helen propped up her chin and looked at her lazily. Don't worry, before Ren Qining comes back and kills me, I will definitely kill you first. Of course, there is also that annoying father of yours. And your father. Glancing at the group of women behind Imperial concubine Yun, Queen Helen curled her lips in disdain. Ever since she became queen, these women had caused her a lot of trouble. Also, at that time, when her cousin was still alive, those concubines often caused trouble for her cousin. Queen Helen did not have a good impression of the harem at all. What did you do to my father? Imperial concubine Yun was shocked. Queen Helen dared to seal the palace and dared to admit her thoughts with such fanfare. She was definitely not crazy. That meant that she had quite a big trump card in her hand. Queen Helen looked at Yili, who was sitting on the side and reading a book, and said with a smile, I don't have the ability to do anything to your Prime Minister father. Only then did everyone notice that there was a woman in white sitting in the hall. It was just that she was leaning against a pillar and reading a book, and everyone's attention was focused on Queen Helen, so they only noticed her now. Yili raised her head, looked at Imperial concubine Yun, and faintly said, Prime Minister Yun is fine for the time being and is recuperating at home. I heard that Imperial concubine Yun is quite good at calligraphy and is good at imitating other people's words. That's right. So what? Imperial concubine Yun subconsciously replied. Yili smiled sweetly, nothing, I don't have anyone under me at the moment, so I'll have to trouble Imperial concubine Yun to help me write a letter. Why should I help you? That's not right. Who are you? I seem to have seen you somewhere. Imperial concubine Yun looked at Yili with some confusion. After Yili changed her appearance had changed slightly, but she still gave her a strange sense of familiarity. Yili smiled but did not speak. Behind Queen Helen, a sharp voice shouted, You are Princess Ding. Chapter 836. You are Princess Ding. A sharp voice came from behind Imperial concubine Yun. Everyone was shocked. Although they were all ladies of the boudoir, they had all heard of Princess Ding's name. How many times had their fathers and brothers lamented that a daughter should be like Princess Ding, and a wife should be like Princess Ding? Even their husband, the King of the North, Ren Qining, would always speak highly of Princess Ding whenever he mentioned her. This made these ladies who had been raised in the boudoir envious and jealous. Having her identity exposed, Yili was not surprised. She just looked up and forgot to look at the woman behind Imperial concubine Yun. It turned out to be an acquaintance. Yili faintly smiled and said, So it was Miss Murong. Why is Miss Murong here? Like this, it was equivalent to admitting her identity. You are Princess Ding. Imperial concubine Yun was startled. She had also seen Princess Ding a few times. Although her appearance was not quite the same as what she saw now, that calm and graceful temperament that made people have no choice but to look up to her, who else could it be but Princess Ding? Princess Ding, why are you here? After being startled, Imperial concubine Yun quickly recovered and stared at Queen Helen in shock. It's you. You colluded with the Prince Ding mansion. Queen Helen unhappily said, Don't say it so harshly. Our North is only cooperating with the Prince Ding mansion to retrieve our own things. What's wrong? You still claim to be the orthodox of the Central Plains. Aren't you also colluding with the northern tribes to attack the Central Plains? Don't say it in such a dignified manner to add gold to your own face. Although imperial concubine Yun did not understand politics, she was not an ignorant girl who did not understand anything. She naturally understood that if Queen Helan cooperated with the Prince Ding mansion, the fate of her people would be worrying. Helan, His Majesty has treated you well. Why did you collude with outsiders to plot a rebellion? Don't forget, the previous queen also died at the hands of the Prince Ding mansion. Queen Helan disdainfully sneered, treated me well. Ren Qining can't wait to kill all the people of the northern region as soon as possible so that he can change the name of his country and restore his country, right? As for my cousin, if Ren Qining hadn't provoked the Prince Ding mansion, how could my cousin have met with such a tragic fate? If I don't settle this account with Ren Qining, who else can I settle it with? You. You're twisting words and forcing logic. Imperial concubine Yun's face turned red with anger, but she had nothing to say. Queen Helan waved her hand and said, "This lady doesn't bully women who can't do anything. You go back and stay there obediently. I won't embarrass you before Ren Qining comes back. If you don't obey." With a sneer, Queen Helan's lips curled into a cold chill. "You can also try and see if I dare to kill." Those present were all weak women who had been raised in their boudoirs and had not seen much of the world. How could they withstand Queen Helan's intimidation? They all wanted to retreat. Imperial concubine Yun was not much better. Biting the corner of her lip, she glared fiercely at Queen Helan and turned to leave. "Yili, give me your life." Next to Imperial concubine Yun, Murong Mingyan roared angrily, and a cold light appeared in her hand as she rushed toward Yili. However, a black shadow flashed past. Before Murong Mingyan could touch Yili, she was slapped away and hit a pillar next to her, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Shuo Jing stood in front of Yili and said in a deep voice, "Princess." Shuo Jing did not know Murong Mingyan, but just by looking at the hatred in her eyes, he knew that this woman probably had a deep hatred for Princess. He had been with Yili for 10 years, but he had never seen Yili become enemies with this woman. However, Shuo Jing only pondered for a moment and understood the identity of this woman. Is it a remnant of the Murong family? "Princess, do you want this subordinate too?" For this kind of person, the Shadow Guard's habit was to eliminate the source of trouble. Yili stared thoughtfully at Murong Mingyan, who looked like she wanted to eat her. Murong Mingyan struggled to stand up and wiped the blood from her lips. "Yili, you're actually not dead." Yili said indifferently, "Didn't you already know that I'm not dead?" "Miss Murong, Yili hasn't done anything unforgivable to you, right? Why do you hate me so much?" Murong Mingyan's eyes were full of hatred. If it wasn't for you, how could my Murong family? How could my grandfather die? It's all your fault. You're greedy and don't feel ashamed to play the blame game. If it wasn't for Murong Xiong relying on his superior martial arts to play with the heroes of the world, what would happen? Would the Murong family be in trouble? It's a pity that the Murong family's beauty trap wasn't attractive enough. You went for wool and came home shorn. Shuo Jing mocked without restraint. Although he didn't go to Xiling that year, he still knew what happened there. Mocking Murong Mingyan was naturally to stab at the most painful place. Murong Mingyan gritted her teeth and her eyes were almost red with anger. She glared at Shuo Jing fiercely, wishing she could tear him apart. Yili turned to Queen Helan and said, "Your Highness, please ask the others to go back first. I have something to discuss with Miss Murong." Queen Helan nodded and said to Imperial concubine Yun and the others, "You can go back. Ming Xiaorong, stay." Imperial concubine Yun and the others also knew that they couldn't afford to offend Queen Helan now, so they turned and left. Murong Mingyan was left behind, but she wasn't afraid. When she followed Ren Qining back to the northern region, Ren Qining promised to help her get revenge. But in these few years, she gradually felt that her hope of revenge was getting slimmer and slimmer. If it weren't for the fact that she hadn't been conferred a title when Immerse Shiryo massacred Rin Chening's harem, she might have even lost her life. She used everything she and the Murong family had in exchange for a position that was neither high nor low. How could Murong Mingyan not hate this? What do you want to say? If you want to kill me, do whatever you want. Murong Mingyan stared at Yili vigilantly and said proudly. Yili smiled and said, Miss Murong, you don't have to be so nervous. I won't do anything to you. It had to be said that although Yili and Immerse Shiryo's reputation were almost on par, the difference between the two's reputation was like heaven and earth. Although Immerse Shiryo had the reputation of the Prince Ding mansion for several generations, his murderous aura was too strong. As long as Prince Ding was mentioned, people would definitely think of the murderous battlefield and countless bloodshed. But when it came to Yili, this Princess Ding, even if many people had enmity, it was very easy for them to overlook the danger she posed. Especially when they were face to face, Yili's gentle and elegant appearance made it very easy for people to let down their guard. Murong Mingyan lightly snorted. Although she didn't let down her guard, her expression couldn't help but relax. Yili smiled and said, Miss Murong should also understand that the Prince Ding mansion wasn't the fault of the Murong family's defeat. At that time, it just so happened that it had no choice. What's more, compared to the Prince Ding mansion, who was the one who schemed against the Murong family more, Miss Murong should be clear in your heart. Murong Mingyan muttered to herself. Of course, she understood what had happened at that time. If she hadn't insisted on provoking, perhaps she wouldn't have provoked the Prince Ding mansion. But Murong Mingyan had always stubbornly believed that it was Immerse Shiryo's appearance that decided the Murong family's defeat. So, it was very natural for her to hate the Prince Ding mansion. What do you want? Murong Mingyan stared at Yili and asked. Chapter 837. Yili smiled faintly, I want the remaining property of Murong family. Murong Mingyan was shocked, I don't know what you're talking about. Everything of Murong family is in Rin Chening's hands. Otherwise, where do you think he got so much money for these 2 years? Yili slowly shook her head, Miss Murong, you don't need to deceive me. I may not know how deep Murong family's foundation is, but there are always some. What's more, with Rin Chening's character, if you don't have any trump cards. Yili didn't finish her words, but everyone present understood what she meant. With Rin Chening's character, if Murong Mingyan had no value, why would he still stay in the palace? He was afraid that it had already been thrown to God knows where. Murong Mingyan was silent for a long time before she said, Murong family has nothing, only money. There's no harm in giving it to you, but what can I get? Murong Mingyan was very clear that since Yili stopped her, even if she didn't admit it, she didn't intend to let her go. What does Miss Murong want? Yili asked. Originally, Yili really didn't think of Murong Mingyan, but now that she met her, she naturally didn't intend to let her go. In these few years, it wasn't only the North that was wantonly mobilizing, the Prince Ding mansion was also doing the same. Although the Prince Ding mansion's property was rich, compared to a huge country, it was still slightly inferior. Naturally, the more money, the better. Murong Mingyan's expression changed slightly. After pondering for a long time, she suddenly said, I want to marry Qing Chengongzi. Yili's eyes turned cold, and she calmly refused, no. Why? Murong Mingyan said in astonishment. She knew that the Prince Ding mansion had been constantly at war these few years, so money was even more important. But she didn't expect that Yili would refuse without even considering it. Yili said, Big Brother has already rejected Miss Murong back then. Even if it's for the sake of the Prince Ding mansion, I can't interfere with his marriage. If Murong Mingyan had brought up other conditions, Yili wouldn't have minded lying to her even if she couldn't fulfill them. But when it came to Su Qingshan's marriage, he couldn't even lie about it. Murong Mingyan gritted her teeth and said, "Aren't you afraid that I'll bury those treasures forever? As long as I don't say anything, no one in this world will be able to find it." All these years, the Genom of Gojoseon of West Hill must have turned the Murong family upside down. It's a pity that he won't get anything. Yilik shook her head and sighed softly. "I've said it before. No matter who it is, I won't interfere with Big Brother's marriage. If the Murong family's wealth was not fated with the Prince Ding mansion, then they could only give up. Besides, if I can't get the Prince Ding mansion, no one else can either, right?" In other words, since Murong Mingyan didn't intend to reveal the whereabouts of the rest of the Murong family's wealth, she didn't need to live anymore. Don't blame Yili for being ruthless. If she had killed Murong Mingyan back then, Ren Qining wouldn't have had so much money to expand his army and attack the Dechu state. If the resentful Murong Mingyan fell into the hands of others, it would be troublesome for the Prince Ding mansion. "Take her away," Yili said to Zhuojing. Zhuojing nodded, grabbed Murong Mingyan, and turned to leave. Beside them, Queen Helan looked at Yili with her chin in her hand and said, "This Murong Mingyan actually has such a background that even you want to take advantage of her." Yili smiled helplessly and said, "The king of the northern region is indeed skilled. There aren't many people in his harem who don't have a background." "Then why didn't you agree with her?" Queen Helan asked doubtfully. She didn't hesitate to marry Ren Qining for the northern region. Naturally, she couldn't understand why Yili would refuse Murong Mingyan's request. Especially since the people of the Central Plains had the rule of having 3 wives and 4 concubines. Even if they didn't like her, they could marry again. Young Master Qingchen wouldn't lose out. Yili faintly said, "There are things that should be done and things that should not be done. Eldest brother has worked hard for Ding Wangfu and me. If I still want to scheme against his marriage for some gold and silver, then am I still human?" Queen Helan shook her head as if she didn't fully understand. "Anyway, I don't understand the thoughts of you Central Plains people. I'll leave Murong Mingyan to you. Anyway, there's no use for me to keep her. She doesn't have any family, so probably no one will save her." "Thank you." Ren Qining was very irritated these days. The news from the reinforcements he sent back was not optimistic at all. Just as he had expected, the nobles and soldiers of the northern region who stayed behind in Chongqing City stood by and did not do anything. The only consolation was that Helan's reply to him indicated that at least the situation hadn't reached the worst point yet. Although the leader of the rebel army was extraordinary in the art of war, he didn't have a deep foundation. If the people of the northern region were willing to help, even the Prince Ding mansion wouldn't have an easy time in the northern region. But in this way, the plan to form an alliance with the northern tribes to attack the Mahist army would be ruined. Ren Qining didn't feel much guilt about this. Every man for himself. He couldn't ignore the danger of his own rear for Yeluye's plan. If that was the case, even if he caused a certain amount of damage and trouble to the Mahist army, Yeluye would still be the one who benefited, and he would still be the one who suffered. He and Yeluye were just allies. They weren't really close like family. Thinking of this, Ren Qining's eyes flashed with determination. He stood up and ordered, "Leave one army to cover the rear. The rest follow me back to Chongqing City to quell the rebellion." "Yes, sir." Ren Qining gave the order. Many generals breathed a sigh of relief. If the king insisted on not retreating and the mortals' homes were taken over, the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. A few generals of the northern region also had a flash of joy in their eyes. It was just that they were sitting at the back and weren't noticed. Even if they noticed, they would probably just think that they didn't want to fight. On the battlefield this time, the valiant and brave northern Jin Kingdom troops were slacking off. But even so, they were much stronger than the Central Plains troops who had just joined the army and hadn't fought many battles. Ren Qining couldn't leave them even if he was angry, so he had to endure it. While preparing to return to court, Enchanting wrote another letter to Queen Helan, listing the benefits for the nobles of the northern region. Queen Helan was also straightforward and quickly wrote back to him, agreeing to his request. In any case, Princess Ding had already said that there was no need to pay for lying. On the city wall of Purple Thorns Pass, Ling Huai and Lang Haoyu stood side by side, watching the northern region troops gradually retreat. Lang Haoyu smiled and said, "It seems that the princess's plan has succeeded." Ling Huai's haggard and upright face also showed a smile. He nodded and said, "Yes, we should also prepare to meet up with Princess Ding. Everyone says that the princess's wisdom and courage are not inferior to a man. I didn't believe it at first, but now it seems that it's more than just not inferior to a man. There were probably not many men in the world who were better than Princess Ding." Lang Haoyu nodded and said with a smile, "Isn't that so? The princess is always unexpected, but it makes people feel that it's reasonable. Father, we should also prepare to come out. In the past, it was Enchanting who came to attack Purple Thorns Pass. This time, we have to come out and chase after him." Chapter 838. That's right. It's time to avenge Qingyu. Although his youngest son was more outstanding than his eldest son, Ling Qingyu was still his beloved son whom he had doted on for decades. He even died for the country and didn't disgrace the Ling family at all. Being able to avenge his beloved son in person also relieved Ling Huai of a burden. Lang Haoyu nodded. "Father is right. Father will definitely avenge Big Brother with your own hands." Although the two of them didn't see eye to eye when Ling Qingyu was alive, Lang Haoyu wouldn't be jealous of his brother who died in battle. It was a good thing that his father could avenge Big Brother with his own hands. It was precisely because of this that he personally requested the prince and the princess consort to let Ling Huai continue to guard Zijing Pass for today. In the rebel camp outside Chongqing City, Su sat leisurely in the main seat of the commander's tent and watched the generals below arguing non-stop. In the end, they were just frightened by the news that Enchanting had returned to the imperial court with his troops. They only had about 300,000 men under their command now, which was less than the other party's troops. Although they had won several battles under Su's command, once Enchanting's million-strong army returned to the imperial court, there was no need for any military strategy. They could just use the human wave tactic to crush them. When they were almost done arguing, Su knocked on the table and said with a faint smile, "Everyone, is there any use in arguing about this now? We've already fought so many battles. Will the imperial court let us go if we stop now? If we fight with all our might, we might have a chance to have a prosperous future. If we surrender like this, our whole family will be executed." The generals below looked at Su and said with a bitter face, "Brother He, tell us honestly, does the Prince Ding mansion have reinforcements? Our brothers have worked hard for you. You can't cheat our brothers." "Yes, yes." Everyone nodded repeatedly. Su said with a smile, "Of course there are reinforcements, but it will take some time for them to arrive. But don't worry. Although the reinforcements haven't arrived yet, the Prince Ding mansion has already sent strong reinforcements." Everyone was startled and looked at each other before someone said, "Could it be young Master Qing Qin? I've heard that young Master Qing Chen's wisdom is unparalleled in the world, and he alone can fight against thousands of soldiers and horses. It should be Prince Ding." Prince Ding had never tasted defeat since he was 14 years old. If it was Prince Ding, why would he fear the million-strong army of the imperial court? Su looked at the entrance of the tent with a smile. The curtain at the entrance was pulled open from the outside. A beautiful and graceful woman in green clothes with black hair walked in from the outside. Behind her were several men in black. They were obviously guards. Everyone was shocked and they saw the Qilin pattern on the bodyguard's clothes. Qilin. The black-clothed guards did not pay attention to the shock of these people. They were scattered in every corner of the tent. Only 2 of them followed behind the green-clothed woman. Under the shocked gazes of everyone, the green-clothed woman walked to the main seat in the commander's tent that Hisu had vacated and sat down. She smiled faintly at everyone. "Everyone, thank you for your hard work." Seeing Hisu's respectful expression towards the green-clothed woman, a few of the more quick-witted people could not help but be moved. Someone with a more impulsive personality could not help but ask, "Who are you? How dare you sit here?" The green-clothed woman smiled faintly and said, "I am Yili, Princess Ding." Everyone was inexplicably shocked. "This subordinate greets the princess," Hisu said respectfully. With someone taking the lead, the others naturally followed. Everyone in the tent bowed and said in unison, "This subordinate greets Princess Ding." At least, they had heard that Prince Ding had deep feelings for Princess Ding. With Princess Ding here, the Prince Ding mansion would not watch as they were executed by the imperial court, right? Yili nodded and said, "Everyone, please be at ease. Please sit." Only then did everyone stand and sit down. After everyone was seated, Yili said, "Many thanks to everyone for being willing to help the Prince Ding mansion reclaim this place. The prince is unable to come because of the battle with the northern tribes, but this consort's words and the prince's promise are equally valid. Everyone seated here will be greatly rewarded after everything is settled. The Prince Ding mansion will not mistreat meritorious subjects." A middle-aged general who looked simple and honest stood up and said, "Princess, this subordinate does not care about the rewards." This subordinate was originally a general of the Dechu state and was forced to help the enemy attack the Chu capital. This matter. Most of the people seated here were originally surrendered generals of the Dechu state. They were not welcomed in the north and were not valued by Ren Qining. It was the Dechu state that had surrendered to the north. Now that they had betrayed the north and returned to the Prince Ding mansion, they would naturally be worried. For this middle-aged general to ask such a question, it could be seen that he was not as simple and honest as he looked. Yili said in a low voice, "Wherever the northern army went, they did not harm the common people. This consort can promise everyone here that as long as you sincerely pledge allegiance to the Prince Ding mansion, we will let bygones be bygones. If you are meritorious, you will still be greatly rewarded. However, if anyone has second thoughts, don't blame this consort for being merciless." "Many thanks, Princess." Everyone stood up and said. These surrendered generals were most worried about being punished after the autumn. Now that they had received Princess Ding's personal promise, they naturally could let go of this matter. For a moment, the atmosphere in the tent became much more lively. Below her, Hisu cupped his hands and said, "Reporting to Princess Consort, Ren Qining has already led an army of 1,000,000 to attack Chongqing. I wonder if we should enter Chongqing City to defend the city and wait for the reinforcements from Zijing Pass." Yili shook her head and said with a smile, "No need. Hisu, listen up. Immediately lead people out of the camp and call for battle. We must win 3 more battles before Ren Qining's army arrives and drive the enemy 30 miles away." Although Hisu did not understand why Yili did this, he knew that the consort had her own plans and would not speak without thinking. He stood up swiftly and said, "This subordinate obeys." After Ren Qining received Queen Helan's reply, he quickly rushed back to Chongqing City. Just as he arrived near Chongqing, he received battle reports from the front line. Even though his army outnumbered the enemy, they still lost 3 battles and were driven dozens of miles away. Only the 50,000 northern troops stationed in the capital could barely cope with the enemy and did not suffer more losses. Ren Qining also knew the character of his troops, so he had to use more than 200,000 northern troops as the vanguard and join forces with the tens of thousands of northern troops stationed in the capital to attack the rebel army. They must take back Chongqing City. Unexpectedly, this was what Yili and Queen Helan had planned. Not only did the army of nearly 300,000 fail to completely wipe out the rebel army after they regrouped, but the northern army even counterattacked, and they saw a flag signal that the Central Plains troops did not understand at all, killing them in a disorderly manner. In an instant, what else did Ren Qi-ning not understand? He was so angry that his eyes almost popped out and he spurted out a mouthful of hot blood. Ren Qi-ning, who was sitting on the horse, tilted his body and fell off. If it were not for the guards beside him, even if he was not killed by the enemy, he would have been trampled to death by the chaotic army. Why? Seeing Queen Helan in bright clothes and high spirits, who appeared in front of the army, Ren Qi-ning asked sternly. He could not believe that he was fooled by a woman who he had never taken seriously. Chapter 839. Queen Helan whipped her horse, her pretty face full of disdain. Why? Of course it's for the lives of my men in the northern region, and also to avenge my cousin and uncle. Ren Qi-ning, who do you think you are? You want to be free and unfettered after using the people of the northern region. Since you appeared in the northern region, how many of my men have died in vain on the battlefield? Now there are less than 300,000 people left, and you want to torment them all. Do you want the northern region to be exterminated? There were more than 700,000 soldiers in the northern region, and the population of the northern region was not large. These 700,000 soldiers accounted for 90% of the young and strong men in the northern region. But now more than half of them had died. If they really let Ren Qi-ning waste these 300,000 soldiers and horses, they would not be able to do anything. What good would it do for the northern region even if they unified the world? What awaited the northern region was only extermination. Even now, if they wanted to restore their former population and military strength, it would probably take decades of effort. Helan. Ren Qi-ning gnashed his teeth. Queen Helan giggled, waved the whip in her hand and pointed at Ren Qi-ning. I'm going to take my men home. If you want to hate someone, hate Princess Ding. These are all her ideas. Sound the horn, retreat. The quaint horn of the northern region sounded throughout the battlefield, and the army of the northern region gradually withdrew from the battlefield toward the northeast. In the distance, Helan looked at Ren Qi-ning complacently with a somewhat provocative expression. Do you dare to chase? Ren Qi-ning gritted his teeth, but more blood spilled from the corners of his tightly closed lips. But he could only watch Queen Helan leave with a laugh. Retreat, return to camp. Yes, Your Majesty. Pfft. Ren Qi-ning spat out another mouthful of blood, and finally fell to the ground, sinking into the dark sweet liquid. Ren Qi-ning was taken back to the camp by the crowd, and only woke up after more than an hour. The generals waiting in the tent looked forward. Your Majesty. Your Majesty, how are you? Helan, you bitch. I swear to tear you into pieces. Ren Qi-ning said with hatred. All the generals looked at each other in dismay. Many of them didn't even have time to figure out what was going on when the northern tribes suddenly attacked together in the midst of the chaos. Ren Qi-ning gritted her teeth and said, that bitch Helan has been colluding with the Prince Ding mansion for a long time. They are waiting for I to return so that they can gather all the northern troops. This. Your Majesty, what should we do if the northern army really becomes our enemy? With Prince Ding's residents eyeing them covetously, it already made them feel extremely pressured. If the northern army turned against them. After all, no one knew better than them just how powerful the northerners were. In these 2 years, if they had not been using the northern troops as the vanguard, how could the million-strong army that they had just barely managed to recruit be able to force the Dechu state into such a state? Ren Qi-ning sat up. These days, her heart was suppressed by many things. After spitting out a mouthful of blood on the battlefield, his mind became much clearer. She sneered and said, since Helan dares to play tricks with I, she must not be a fool. If she brings less than 300,000 soldiers into the battle between our army and the Prince Ding mansion, she won't be able to bring back a single one of the hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the northern tribes. In a few days, she will leave on her own. When Helan was mentioned, Ren Qining's eyes couldn't help but be filled with hatred. He relied on Helan's cousin, his ex-wife, to establish his country. He never thought that he would fall into the hands of his ex-wife's cousin, his current wife. Send someone to investigate carefully. Find out who is in charge of the Prince Ding mansion this time. To be able to use such methods, the person cooperating with the northern tribes is definitely not some random soldier. Ren Qining ordered, the original spies can't be used anymore. I'm afraid that they have already been controlled by someone. Go and rearrange the manpower. Yes. The subordinate cupped his hands in acknowledgement and turned to leave. Your Majesty, who do you think will come this time? The confidant beside the bed asked carefully. Ren Qining said coldly, there aren't many people in the Prince Ding mansion who can use such methods. Su Hongyu and Su Hongyan usually don't leave the northwest. Mo Xiuyao is currently at war with the northern tribes. This time, if it's not Su Qingchen, then it's Yi Li. Ren Qining lowered his eyebrows and thought for a moment, then said decisively, it must be Yi Li. When we were in Glass City, she was also the one who interacted with that bitch Helan quite a bit. Ren Qining's intestines were now broken. Back then, he didn't guard against that bitch Helan at all and brought her to Glass City. He even let her reach an agreement with the Prince Ding mansion right under his nose. Unfortunately, it was too late for regrets now. Your Majesty, that Queen Helan, kill. At all costs, we must not let that bitch return to the northern tribes alive. Ren Qining's expression was ferocious, and his voice was so cold that everyone in the tent couldn't help but shiver. After everyone left, the tent regained its tranquility. Ren Qining leaned against the side of the bed and closed his eyes to rest. But no one knew what he was thinking, but from time to time, the muscles on his face would twitch and his expression would distort. Mo Xiuyao, Yi Li. You actually dared to scheme against I will make you wish you were dead. While Ren Qining's tent was filled with wind and rain, the Prince Ding mansion's tent on the other side was indeed filled with laughter and singing. Although the tribal leaders of the northern tribes and the old officials of the previous dynasty couldn't wait to fight to the death. But the ordinary soldiers didn't have such deep resentment between them. When Ren Qining entered the pass, for the sake of his future rule, he didn't let the soldiers kill the innocent like the northern tribes. Naturally, he didn't have any deep hatred with the ordinary people. In these 2 years, the Central Plains soldiers had seen the northern tribes soldiers rush to the front in every battle. They were exceptionally brave and full of admiration. Now that these northern tribes soldiers had rebelled against Ren Qining, everyone could be considered to be on the same side. Naturally, there was nothing much to say. In the entire camp, except for the soldiers who were on routine patrol, everyone, regardless of whether they were from the Central Plains or the northern tribes, sat together to drink and eat meat. The singing and dancing were even livelier than when they had won a battle. The people of the northern tribes had no intention of participating in the Central Plains war and were eager to go home. Tonight could be considered as a farewell banquet hosted by Yi Li and the Prince Ding mansion for the people of the northern tribes. In the open-air camp, Yi Li led the people of the Prince Ding mansion and the Central Plains generals of the recently recovered northern tribes to sit side by side with Queen Helan's father, the current leader of the northern tribes. They drank good wine together. The people of the northern region saw that although this seemingly weak Prince Ding's residence was not very good at drinking, his actions were very clean and efficient. He was not like those people under Ren Qining who hid a knife behind a smile and had a stomach full of cunning plots. They also heard that it was all thanks to Princess Ding that so many northern tribes soldiers could safely withdraw from the battlefield. They couldn't help but have a very good impression of this princess of the Central Plains. The only women present were Queen Helan and Yi Li. Queen Helan didn't sit on her own side but went to Yi Li's side to join in the fun. Now, seeing that the people of the northern tribes were about to go home, Queen Helan's pretty face also showed some playfulness and relaxation. At that time, she would be even more relaxed than before, truly like a 16 or 17-year-old carefree girl. She was not a queen of the northern tribes who had to pretend to be arrogant while shouldering the rise and fall of the whole tribe. Chapter 840. Princess Ding, this time we were able to safely withdraw from the pass and return to our homeland, thank you very much. Come. Helan toasts to you. Queen Helan raised a wine bowl and smiled at Yi Li. Yi Li smiled and picked up the wine cup. She smiled and said, I can't hold my liquor, so I'll drink this cup. Cheers. She raised her head and drank the wine in the cup in one gulp. The most ordinary strong wine, once in the stomach, did indeed have a hot feeling. Yi Li's jade-like beautiful face was also stained with a trace of red. Queen Helan shrugged and also drank it in one gulp. She smiled and said, you are very straightforward, very much to the taste of our northern region people. It's just that your alcohol tolerance is too low. Queen Helan. Yi Li smiled helplessly. Her alcohol tolerance was not bad among women. But compared with Queen Helan, a woman of the northern region who had been drinking strong wine since childhood, it was really not enough. Queen Helan glared at her unhappily. I'm not a queen anymore. Who wants to be a bullshit queen? This girl will be the greatest female chief of the northern region in the future. Although the northern region was a barbarian land, it did not value the difference between men and women, let alone the preference for men over women. From ancient times to the present, there had been several female chiefs in every tribe, and they were not worse than men. Queen Helan's father, who was the current leader of the northern region, only had one daughter, Helan. This time, she had made such a great contribution to the tribe, so she was naturally the next chief. Yi Li smiled and said, okay, it's my fault. Princess Helan. Helan pouted and stared at Yi Li for a long time before nodding with satisfaction. That's more like it. After saying that, she turned and pulled Hisu, Qin Feng, and the others, who were sitting below Yi Li, to drink. Obviously, they were also drunk. On the other side, not far from Yi Li, Helan's father obviously heard his daughter's words. He raised his wine bowl helplessly to Yi Li and said with a smile, Helan has been spoiled by me. Princess, please forgive me. It's fine. Princess Helan is intelligent and bright. Patriarch is very fortunate. Although Yi Li had only met the temporary chief of the northern tribe a few times, she knew that he was no ordinary barbarian since he was able to raise a daughter like Helan. Ren Qining's biggest mistake was that he had underestimated the barbarians of the northern region. The people of the northern region were able to help him establish his country, so naturally, they could also make him suffer a crushing defeat. The patriarch doted on his daughter, Yu Helan, and was naturally very happy to hear Yi Li praise her. He threw his head back and laughed, then drank several bowls of wine. All the men in the army were silent for a long time. Seeing that the chief of the northern region was so forthright, everyone present began to clamor, and the atmosphere in the camp became more lively. Princess Ding, I've long heard that the Mahist army is brave and good at fighting. Every one of them has extraordinary skills. We'd like to compare notes with our brothers from the Mahist army. Princess Ding, please allow it. A young man among the generals of the northern region stood up and said loudly. Hearing this, everyone's eyes lit up. The Mahist army had been known as brave and good at fighting for 200 years, and it could be said that they had rarely been defeated. Perhaps the Mahist army wasn't the bravest army in the world, but it was definitely the army that had experienced the longest and was still as brave as ever. Many of the famous warriors in history had been brave and extraordinary in their early days, but after a period of prosperity, many of them gradually became second-rate because their superiors were content with pleasure or for some other reason. But for the Mahist army to still be able to look down on other countries for 200 years and still be able to sweep through the world after being suppressed by successive rulers of the Dachu state, this was unheard of. The men of the northern region were fond of fighting, and now that there was a general from the Mahist army nearby, they naturally wouldn't let go of this opportunity to compare notes. Yili was in a difficult position. Of the people present in the Prince Ding mansion, only Qin Feng and He Su had led troops before. But no matter who it was, it wouldn't be fair for either of them to fight with the people of the northern region. If they weren't born as shadow guards, if they weren't from the Black Cloud Cavalry, and if they weren't from Qi Lin's demonic training. In terms of individual strength, they could definitely kill any of the northern region's generals. Hearing that there was going to be a fight, Princess Helen's eyes immediately lit up. She ran in front of Yili and said with a smile, "Princess Ding, why don't you agree with them? I also want to see how strong your Prince Ding mansion's generals are." Yili looked at her with a helpless smile. Princess Helen didn't care, pulling out the soft whip at her waist and pointing it at He Su. "You're a general from the Mahist army, aren't you? This princess wants to experience your skills." He Su stared blankly. The people of the Prince Ding mansion all had a strange habit. Because of their relationship with Yili, they never looked down on women, but they also felt that there was no other woman in the world who could be compared to Yili. If he fought with this Princess Helen, no matter who won or lost, he would be laughed at by those heartless people when he returned. "Princess Helen, this..." Princess Helen raised her chin and said, "What is this? This lady is openly challenging you. Are you looking down on this lady?" He Su glanced at Yili sitting at the head of the table, only to see her calm expression as if she didn't see his pleading eyes. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed that the princess had no intention of helping him out. On the side, Zhuge Jing, Lin Han, Qin Feng, and the others all looked at her with pleading eyes. This princess of the northern region was not to be trifled with. If he won, he would be bullying a woman, but if he lost, he would be worse than a woman. In that case, princess, please. He Su stood up and cupped his hands. Chapter 841. Since he had agreed to Princess Helen's challenge, He Su did not beat around the bush. He stood up and walked to the open space in the center. Princess Helen was very happy to see that he was straightforward and followed him. He Su cupped his hands and said, "Princess, don't go too far." Princess Helen replied with a fierce whip. "You people from the Central Plains talk too much nonsense." The long soft whip mercilessly lashed at He Su. He Su was born in the Shadow Guard. As the head of the 4 Shadow Guards by Yili's side and the first batch of people personally trained by Yili, he also had nearly 10 years of military career. If Princess Helen picked him, He Su would not need to lead troops to war and could just take off his armor and return home. He Su did not even use his weapon. He casually sidestepped and dodged Princess Helen's seemingly fierce attack. Princess Helen was a little surprised. Although she was not arrogant enough to think that she could defeat Yili's capable general, she did not expect the other party to dodge her whip without even moving. She snorted and said with a smile, "You're really powerful. Again. Let's see how you dodge this." Princess Helen stopped probing and the long whip in her hand rolled toward He Su like a sky full of poisonous snakes. He Su took a step back and dodged Princess Helen's whip with his bare hands. The two of them began to exchange blows in the open space in the field. In the blink of an eye, they had already exchanged 50 to 60 moves. He Su felt that he should give enough face to this princess. With a snort, he directly ignored the shadow of Princess Helen's whip and firmly grabbed the end of the long whip. With a slight shake, Princess Helen's whip fell out of her hand and was put away by He Su. Everyone present cheered in unison. Hisu put away the long whip and walked up to Princess Helan, saying, "Thank you for letting me win, Princess's whip." Princess Helan looked at him from head to toe. The general of the Mahist army is indeed powerful. I, Helan, am convinced. She took the whip and no longer pestered him. She returned to sit beside Yili. The northern generals watching the battle could naturally see that Hisu was holding back. On one hand, they admired Hisu's kung fu, and on the other hand, they were even more eager to fight. The young man who had asked Yili for help was the first to stand up and challenge Hisu. It was inconvenient to fight with a woman, but it was a different story when fighting with a man. Hisu also very straightforwardly accepted his challenge. The two men began to shout in the open space of the field. Although the people of the northern region generally did not practice internal energy, their external energy and physical strength were far beyond that of the people of the Central Plains. Hisu's interest was also piqued. He decided not to use his internal energy and only use some of the most commonly used martial arts in the army to fight with him. The intensity of the fight between the two men was naturally incomparable to the fight with Princess Helan just now. Their punches and kicks made the blood of the people around them boil, and there was a lot of noise. Hisu fought 5 or 6 men of the northern region in a row without showing any signs of weakness. After that, Qin Feng, Lin Han, Zhua Jing, and the others also entered the field. Their martial arts were not inferior to Hisu's at all. Not only did the northern generals admire them greatly. The Central Plains generals who had surrendered on their side were also very shocked. Even these unknown young generals under Princess Ding were so powerful. How awe-inspiring were those famous generals who had been famous for a long time. They could not help but rejoice in their hearts that they had surrendered to the Prince Ding mansion early. With such strength, how could Rinqining not be defeated? It had to be said that this was actually a beautiful misunderstanding. Among these 4 people, except for Hisu, their ability to lead troops and fight was probably not much better than the generals present. However, their martial arts could definitely be ranked in the top 10 of the Prince Ding mansion and the Mahist army. Early in the morning, 50 miles northeast of Chongqing City, 300,000 soldiers of the northern region had already headed north under the leadership of the tribal leaders of the northern region. They would come out from there and return to their own familiar land. Counting from the time Rinqining appeared on the land of the northern region had undergone too many changes in the past decade. They had also been blinded by desire and ambition. Following Rinqining, they wanted to build a huge empire and build a great undertaking that would last forever. They wanted all the rich land in the world to become the hunting ground for the men of the northern region. However, they had also paid a huge price. In just over a decade, from the previous tribal war to the war at the pass and the 2 confrontations with the Mahist army, the population of the northern region had decreased by 60% compared to a decade ago. The number of young men had also decreased by more than 80%. If they continued to be stubborn, what awaited them was only extinction. Therefore, they now brought the remaining men back to the place they were familiar with and started a stable life again. Perhaps in another decade or so, the population of the northern region would still be as prosperous as before. Princess Ding, we are leaving. Thank you for this time. I, the northern region, will never forget the great kindness of the Prince Ding mansion. Princess Helan stood on the side of the official road with a horse and said with a sincere smile. Yili smiled faintly and said, "Princess, take care. There is still a war in the rear. Forgive me for not being able to see you off." Princess Helan smiled and said, "No need to see me off. Your Central Plains is very fun. When the war is over, I will come and play with you." Yili smiled and said, "I will be waiting for you at any time." Princess Helan mounted the horse and cupped her hands towards Yili and said, "I am leaving. By the way, Princess Ding, that Rinqining is very vengeful and ruthless. After I leave, he will definitely vent his anger on you. You must be careful. Yili nodded and said with a smile, I know. Princess, take care. Princess Helan nodded and turned her horse to chase after the large group in front of her. She heard a sharp whoosh in the distance. Princess Helan turned her head and saw a feather arrow with a cold glint shooting towards her. Princess, be careful. Yili shouted. At the same time, she moved her sleeve and a silver light flew out from her sleeve and shot towards the arrow. At the same time, Zhuijing and Lin Han, who were beside Yili, jumped up and slashed at the arrow with their swords. Finally, the arrow was shot down before it could reach Princess Helan. Princess Helan was not injured, but the horse under her was startled. It neighed and raised its front leg to throw Princess Helan off the horse. On the other side, Qin Feng flew forward and pulled Princess Helan down from the horse's back. He then slapped the horse's body. The majestic horse immediately fell to the ground, but it did not die. It just lay on the ground and shook its head uneasily. Princess Helan was still in shock after being pulled down by Qin Feng. She could not help but exclaim, "What's going on? Bitch, give me your life." Before Yili could return to Princess Helan, countless men in black had already surrounded them. Yili glanced at them indifferently and said, "It's Ren Qining's men." Princess Helan was furious. Her hatred and anger towards Ren Qining were no less than Ren Qining's towards her. She had originally planned to trap Ren Qining once and forget about it. In any case, the Prince Ding mansion would take care of him. She did not have to do anything more and lost the lives of the northern soldiers for no reason. She did not expect that Ren Qining would dare to send people to assassinate her. "Do you think I'm afraid of you?" Princess Helan did not use the whip anymore. She pulled out the dagger at her waist and rushed towards the assassins with a few guards beside her. Yili said to Qin Feng, "Don't let anyone hurt Princess Helan." Chapter 842. Qin Feng nodded. With a wave of his hand, the guards of the Prince Ding mansion also rushed forward. The melee between the two sides was not much gentler than a small battle. "Ren Qining, I know you're here. Come out." Princess Helan slashed at an assassin in black and shouted loudly in all directions. A cold voice rang out not far away. "I'll fulfill your wish." Ren Qining jumped down from a small hill by the roadside. The long sword in his hand was like a snake as he stared at Princess Helan and shot straight at her. He Su and Qin Feng flew forward at the same time. Their two long swords struck Ren Qining's sword at the same time, blocking Ren Qining. Behind him, Lin Han had already pulled Princess Helan to Yili's side. Ren Qining glanced at He Su and Qin Feng in front of him, then looked at Lin Han and Zhuijing who were guarding Yili. He knew that if he didn't deal with these people today, he wouldn't be able to touch a single hair on Princess Helan's head. Without saying anything else, he waved his long sword and charged straight at Qin Feng. Even if Ren Qining's martial arts were not the best in the world, he was still one of the best. Back then, Ling Taihan and Lei Jinting had personally said that Ren Qining must be one of the top 10 masters in the world. Although He Su and Qin Feng's martial arts cultivation were still a little inferior to Ren Qining's, the Prince Ding mansion, especially Qi Lin, was best at fighting together. Back then, a few fledgling Qi Lin had been able to capture Mu Qingcang, one of the top 4 masters in the world. Now that He Su and Qin Feng had joined forces, Ren Qining wouldn't be able to escape for a while. Ren Qining's fight with He Su and Qin Feng lasted for more than half a shurchen. Yili looked at Qin Feng and He Su who were gradually falling behind. She also praised Ren Qining in her heart. No matter what kind of person Ren Qining was, at least his martial arts were really good. At least he was much stronger than Tan Jiji. "Young Master Ren, there won't be any results even if we continue fighting like this." Why don't you listen to this consort and let everyone stop? Yili raised her voice. Ren sneered, and his attacks became even fiercer. Yili narrowed her eyes slightly. Young Master Ren, this consort has never been a gentleman. This consort is particular about the rule of not bullying with numbers. The implication was that if Ren insisted on fighting, she didn't care about bullying with numbers. Ren only had a slight advantage over He Su and Qin Feng. If Qin Feng and He Su really fought with their lives on the line, Ren might not be able to escape unscathed. If Shuo Jing and Lin Han were to join in, Ren would definitely lose. After a moment, Ren finally snorted coldly and retreated with a sullen face. The remaining assassins also finally stopped and stood behind Ren. Looking at the sullen man opposite her, Yili smiled faintly and stepped forward. Young Master Ren, I didn't expect to see you again so soon after we parted in Glass City. Hearing this, Ren expression became even more unsightly. He glanced gloomily at Yili and the others. He pointed his sword at Princess Helan and said, "Hand that slut over. The matter between I and the Prince Ding mansion will be decided on the battlefield." Yili shook her head regretfully. Princess Helan is a friend of the Prince Ding mansion. At least before she leaves the border, the Prince Ding mansion cannot let anyone touch her. If young Master Ren must kill her, you can wait until she returns to the north. At that time, I won't be able to do anything and won't be troubled, right? Ren sneered and stared at Yili. Princess Ding means that you must protect this slut. Yili sighed helplessly. I have no choice. Young master, please forgive me. Do you think that I only have these people with me? Ren said gloomily. I must tear this slut into pieces. Enough, surnamed Ren. Princess Helan couldn't endure being scolded by such a slut like Ren. She stepped forward and stood beside Yili. She glared at Ren and said, "Is there anyone more slutty than you in this world? My cousin saved your life, so my uncle married my cousin to you. But you pretended to be pitiful and deceived them. You even killed my cousin. You used the men of the north to fight for you and help you build your country. You turned your back on us and have sinister intentions. You even want to exterminate the north. In the words of you Central Plains people, people like you should be called scum. Trash. Despicable. The hundreds of thousands of heroic spirits of the north who died in vain will not let you go. I curse you to die alone in this life and the next. A lowly person like you still wants to revive your country. Dream on." Yili couldn't help but cover her mouth and hold back the laughter in her heart. Helan's Central Plains language was ordinary, but when it came to scolding people, even 3 Central Plains people couldn't compare to her. Just by looking at Ren face, which was green, blue, and purple, one could see how wonderful her scolding was. Yili coughed softly and said to Princess Helan, "All right, Helan. This place was not a place to fight, not to mention that everyone was so close to each other. If Ren really went crazy with anger, it wouldn't be good if he hurt anyone." Princess Helan still wanted to continue, but for the sake of Yili, she resentfully shut her mouth. Seeing that Ren had calmed down, Yili said, "Young Master Ren, I have no right to intervene in the grievances between you and the North, and I can't say who is right and who is wrong. This consort only wants to ask young Master, will killing Princess Helan have any effect on the situation?" Ren was stunned. At this point, the North's army had already left. Whether he killed Helan or not, it would have no effect on the situation. At most, it would help him vent his anger or give the Prince Ding mansion a slap in the face. But if Yili refused to back down, how much would he have to pay to take Helan's life? Looking back at the hundreds of assassins he brought, only a few were left. Ren eyes dimmed. Yili continued, "I know that young Master Ren still has an ambush. But young Master Ren should know that I can't just come here with a few guards. To be honest, Princess Helen's life or death has no effect on the Prince Ding mansion, but if young Master Ren insists on making a move, I can only accompany you. The Prince Ding mansion promised to send the people of the north away safely, and they definitely won't go back on their word. Ren Qining was silent for a moment, looked at Yili, and sneered, Princess, aren't you afraid of raising a tiger and inviting calamity if you let them leave now? I was able to persuade them back then. Could it be that they were really deceived by I? If they didn't have their own ambitions, how could they be persuaded by I? Yili said calmly, no one can guarantee that there will always be peace and prosperity. At least at this moment, the North doesn't have the heart to fight for the Central Plains. If it weren't for young Master Ren, they would still be fishing and hunting in the White Mountains and Black Waters, and have nothing to do with the Central Plains. I can't exterminate the North for the so-called future, can I? If the Central Plains is always strong and powerful, the foreign races naturally won't dare to have the slightest disrespect. If they are willing to degenerate, even if the North is exterminated today, how can young Master Ren guarantee that there won't be a western or eastern region tomorrow? Ren Qining snorted, knowing that he couldn't persuade Yili to back down. A woman like Yili had her own conclusions long ago, and it was indeed difficult to persuade others. Ren Qining shot an arrow at Princess Helen, you'd better not take a single step in the north for the rest of your life, or I will exhaust my whole life to make you die without a complete corpse. Chapter 843. Princess Helen was not afraid at all and replied with a sneer, this lady will pray to the great god day and night to let you die early and reincarnate. Seeing that Ren Qining had compromised, Yili did not say anything more. She instructed Qin Feng, send someone to escort Princess Helen to catch up with the group in front. Also send the princess out of seclusion. Qin Feng nodded silently, Princess, please. Princess Helen knew that Yili was worried that Ren Qining would secretly play tricks, so she let her go first. She made a face at Yili, waved her hand, and mounted a horse led by a guard behind her. She led her people and rode away. Princess Ding. See you later. After Princess Helen left, only Yili and Ren Qining were left on the side of the road. The two sides were confronting each other. Ren Qining had been angry for the past 2 days, but when he was really angry and faced Yili again, he forced himself to calm down. Looking at Yili's beautiful face, he sneered, Princess Ding, good move. Yili raised her hand and brushed the hair on her cheek. She smiled faintly and said, young Master Ren, you flatter me. I just happened to be here. The veins on Ren Qining's forehead bulged, and his eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. In Ren Qining's ears, Yili's words clearly sounded like she was mocking him for being incompetent, which gave her the opportunity to plot against him. He took a deep breath and suppressed the monstrous anger in his heart. Ren Qining glanced at the people around Yili and sneered. She sneered and said, everyone says that Prince Ding and Princess Ding are inseparable, but why didn't I see Prince Ding fighting this time? Could it be that he looks down on I and disdains to show himself? Young Master Ren, why do you ask when you already know the answer? Our prince is now fighting with the northern tribes. Naturally, he is not here. Yili said, besides, although Prince and I are husband and wife, we are not the same person. How can there not be a time when we are separated? Ren Qining stared at Yili, and his smile became more sinister. I have long heard that Princess Consort is also a god of war. It seems that this time, I will not have the chance to experience the tactics of the war god of the Chu state. I will not have lived in vain to experience Princess Consort's military tactics. But, if Princess Consort is lost again, I want to see if Prince Ding will have the chance to kill my entire family. When he said the last sentence, Qining's words, there was a bloodthirst. In the past 2 years, the conflict between the tribes of the northern region and the old officials of the Central Plains had intensified. It started when Mo Xiaoyao sent people to assassinate the queen and the princes of the northern Jin kingdom. It could be said that Ren Qining's defeat today was also the root of the disaster at that time. Perhaps he did not understand at the start, but after thinking about it, even someone as unscrupulous as Ren Qining could not help but tremble with fear at Mo Xiaoyao's schemes and calculations. Yili pursed her lips and smiled. How can I let you sacrifice the lives of your entire family? I will take care of myself, and I hope you will too. I hope so. Ren Qining sneered. Goodbye. At this time, both sides could be said to have revealed their true intentions, so there was no need to be polite. I won't see you out. Ren Qining said. Ren Qining watched Yili and the rest leave calmly. He stood by the ancient road with his hands behind his back, and no one knew what he was thinking. Seeing him like this, the assassin standing behind him did not dare to disturb him. After a long while, a subordinate who could not wait any longer came to find him. Seeing Ren Qining standing there in a daze, he hurried forward to greet him. Your Majesty, the Northern Army and gone. Ren Qining said coldly. Should I go and chase them back immediately? There's no need. Ren Qining shook his head and turned to walk back. He said in a low voice, let's go back. We're about to prepare for the battle. In at most 3 to 5 days, Linghuai's troops at Bauhinia Pass will definitely arrive. The general following behind him was shocked. If that is the case, won't we be pincered by the Mahist army? Your Majesty, shouldn't we retreat first? Ren Qining looked back and asked calmly, where should we retreat to? Behind us is Bauhinia Pass. If we go north, even if we break through Yili's blockade, do you think the Northern Army will bite back at us at this time? The general behind him could not help but change expression. After thinking for a bit, he broke out in a cold sweat, Your Majesty, then what should we do? What should we do? Ren Qining walked at the front, his footsteps steady. But no one saw the trace of confusion that flashed across his face. I also want to know what to do. The area outside Bauhinia Pass had been vast and sparsely populated since ancient times. There were not even many decent cities. In this kind of place, there was no need to pay attention to the art of war or the terrain when fighting. The terrain was flat, and all the soldiers and horses had nowhere to hide in broad daylight. But no matter how weak Ren Qining's troops were, they still had millions of troops. As the saying goes, enough ants can bite an elephant to death. Linghuai's Mahist army of more than 200,000 and Yili's troops that surrendered only had about 500,000. For a time, the two armies were in a deadlock outside Bauhinia Pass. A few days later, the Mahist army sent out an edict personally written by Princess Ding, saying that the people were innocent. The Mahist army in the north was fighting with the barbarians in the north, and they were unwilling to act rashly against their own people. As long as the soldiers of the northern army were willing to surrender, everything would be forgotten. If they were still willing to join the army, they could join the Mahist army. If they were not willing, they could disarm and return to their fields. On the other hand, the news that Ren Qining was not an orphan of the previous dynasty came out of nowhere. There were also a few old officials under Ren Qining who personally testified. Hence, not only were the ordinary soldiers in the lower ranks divided, but even the generals under Ren Qining who were originally trusted started to waver in their hearts. In the northern army camp, there were soldiers escaping every day. What's more, he directly surrendered to the enemy on the battlefield. No matter how severe Qining's punishment was, it was still not enough. On the 15th of August, the two armies once again faced off 10 miles outside Chongqing City. Linghuai, who originally split into two groups, also led his troops to meet up with Yili and Hisu. Ren Qining, who originally had millions of troops, was now left with less than 200,000 troops. Their morale was low, and their appearance was disorderly. They could not be compared to the Mahist army behind Yili and the others who were all dressed in black. Everyone knew that today was the last battle. Enchanting was wearing a bright yellow dragon robe, riding on a chestnut horse. He looked coldly at Yili and the others on the opposite side. He seemed to be losing but not losing. After a moment of silence, Enchanting pulled out his sword and pointed at Yili. He said in a deep voice, "Princess Ding, I's defeat today was not because of the war, but because the heavens failed me." If it was only about marching and fighting, there was really nothing to say these days. Originally, Enchanting with millions of troops should not have been defeated so quickly. Unfortunately, Enchanting did not have any advantage at all. How could he not be defeated? How could he be convinced if he was defeated? Before Yili could speak, Leng Haoyu, who was following behind him, sneered, "The heavens help those who achieve Tao. If you don't fail the heavens, how will the heavens fail you?" Enchanting's face sank, and he did not say anything more. "In that case, Princess Ding, can we fight?" Ling Huai, who was on the right side of Yili, patted his horse and said coldly, "There is no need for the princess to fight. I want to see the Northern Region King's martial arts." Chapter 844. Enchanting smiled disdainfully and said, "Old General Leng, you're old. Why don't you retire at home? I don't want to bully you because you're old and weak." Ling Huai was so angry that his face turned green. With a roar, he raised his sword and rushed towards Enchanting. Seeing him like this, Enchanting didn't hold back. He waved his sword and slashed back. Everyone watched Ling Huai and Enchanting fight and didn't go forward to help. However, Leng Haoyu frowned slightly as he stared at the two people fighting. The long sword in his hand had already been unsheathed. Yili sighed in a low voice, "Old General Leng is no match for Enchanting. Ling Air, go and help." Although Enchanting's martial arts were brilliant, he couldn't do anything if Qin Feng and the others swarmed him. Yili had never liked the monotonous one-on-one practice before fighting. However, Ling Huai had a grudge against Enchanting for his son's death. Ling Huai was no longer young. Previously, he had forced himself to guard Zijing Pass and the Chu capital for a few months, so his vitality was greatly damaged. He still refused to rest and led the troops to guard the Purple Thorn Pass in order to avenge his beloved son. Yili naturally couldn't disappoint Ling Huai. Leng Haoyu had been worried about Ling Huai's safety for a long time. As soon as Yili spoke, he immediately rushed over. With a swing of his sword, he blocked Enchanting's sword that was stabbing towards Ling Huai. Enchanting sneered, "One died, but there's still a good son." Without another word, 3 consecutive swords came towards Ling Huai. Leng Haoyu's long sword danced out a sword net, blocking Enchanting's sword. Qin Feng whispered beside Yili, "Princess, Ling Air and General Leng are no match for Enchanting." Enchanting's martial arts were not only among the top 10 in the world, but at least among the top 5. Compared to Ling Taihan and Lei Jinting, he only lacked time and experience. As for a natural-born freak like Mo Xiuyao, he naturally couldn't compare. However, Leng Haoyu's martial arts could only be considered good. Compared to a general like Ling Huai, it was unknown how much stronger he was. Yili said indifferently, "Don't worry about them. Do it. We must end this battle today." Suddenly, the sound of war drums could be heard on the battlefield. The Mahist army behind Yili roared in unison as they charged towards the army of the northern region. Over the past few days, the northern region army had either fled or surrendered. Only these few people were left, and they were already frightened out of their wits. When they saw the Mahist army charging over like a black tide, they were on the verge of collapsing. In the chaos, Enchanting, Ling Huai, and Leng Haoyu gradually moved to a place with fewer people. In the end, it was Rinchining who impatiently swept Leng Huai to the ground with his sword. He was seriously injured. Father. Leng Haoyu's expression changed. He swung his sword at Rinchining a few times. Behind him, Yili, Qin Feng and the others also followed. Qin Feng saw that Leng Huai was seriously injured and Leng Haoyu was also injured. Without saying a word, he directly drew his sword and stood up straight. Behind him, Zhuejing also joined the battle. Yili then called people to send Leng Huai away to treat his injuries. Rinchining had been fighting hard for days. At this time, he was facing Leng Haoyu, Qin Feng and Zhuejing at the same time. Gradually, he began to show a trace of exhaustion. Qin Feng saw a flaw and mercilessly stabbed his sword diagonally across his chest. Rinchining's face turned pale, and a trace of scarlet overflowed from the corner of his mouth. With a swing of his sword, he pushed the three people away and leaped forward. Seeing that he was about to escape, everyone hurriedly chased after him. Outside Chongqing City, by a quiet lake, Rinchining, dressed in a bright yellow dragon robe, sat quietly, looking at the small city standing not far away. He had been busy for half of his life and used all kinds of methods to repay his kindness. What he got was only that small city and the incomplete half of the palace. So tired, Qi Lin had never failed when he made a move. Qin Feng's sword seemed to have missed, but in fact, it was just that he wouldn't die for a while. It was just a little better than dying immediately. Rinchining tapped a few acupoints, but the blood was still flowing out of the wound. He simply didn't bother to care about it. He casually inserted his sword into the ground beside him, sat alone by the lake, and let out a long sigh of relief. After a while, Yili and the others followed. Seeing the figure by the lake, Yili raised her hand to stop everyone and walked forward alone. Qin Feng and Zhuejing exchanged glances. They each took a position and stared vigilantly at the bright yellow figure. Hearing the footsteps behind him, Rinchining turned around and saw Yili. He smiled faintly and said, "You're here. If you didn't come, I might not have been able to wait for you." Yili looked down and saw that the ground under him was stained red with blood. His face was as pale as paper, and he didn't have the vigor he had when he fought with the people on the battlefield. "Northern Region King, do you have something to say?" Yili asked with a lowered eyebrow. Rinchining waved his hand indifferently and said, "You can call me Rinchining. It's a name that has been with me my whole life. I'm too lazy to change it." Before he died, he didn't care about the title of Northern Region King or Lin Yuan's identity. In fact, only the name Rinchining had been with him his whole life. The other two names were probably just what he wanted. Yili changed her words and said, "Young Master Ren, do you have something to say?" Rinchining said faintly, "I don't have anything to say. It's just that I'm about to die. I don't want to die alone. It's a pity that I can't fight with Princess." Yili said, "I'm afraid that my insignificant skills won't be able to enter young Master Ren's eyes." Rinchining looked at her with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, "Actually, I seriously thought about whether I should risk my life to kill you. Whenever I think about Imo Xiuyao's expression when he hears about your death, I feel very happy." Yili raised her eyebrows and said, "If that's the case, why didn't young Master Ren do it before?" Rinchining shook his head and sighed, "I don't have the confidence to kill you. Moreover, thinking about it now, it's very boring. Even if Imo Xiuyao is heartbroken, it won't do me any good. Although many people think that I've done so many things, it's very funny. But I always feel that Princess won't laugh at me. There's nothing funny about people who work hard for their beliefs. Even if their beliefs are wrong in the eyes of the world. Moreover, who can understand what's right and wrong in this world?" Yili said lightly. "Well said." Rinchining smiled and said, "So, it's wrong." Yili looked down and said, "If young Master Ren feels that it's not wrong, then it's not wrong." Ren Qining weakly supported himself with his sword and muttered in a low voice, "Yes, if I feel that it's not wrong, then it's not wrong. If it's wrong, then my life, what is it?" Scenes from when he was young slowly flowed through his eyes. Since he was young, he had been entrusted with a heavy responsibility. He was the only descendant of the Lin family, the only hope for the previous dynasty to restore the country. Children of the same age, when others were acting spoiled in their parents' arms, he was in the study with his teacher to study the classics of governing the country. When others were playing and playing, he was learning strategy and tactics. When others were sleeping soundly in their beds, he had to wake up early to practice martial arts, training in the winter and the hot summer. It was a pity that he wasn't a genius like Emo Xiuyao. Now that he had fallen to such a state, it could only be said that this was his fate. But did anyone ask him what he wanted to do in this life? Have you ever done anything that you want to do? Chapter 845. A pair of beautiful and energetic eyes flashed past his eyes. At that time, he had just turned 20 years old, but as a young man, he met an innocent and intelligent girl who had never seen the world. She had saved his life, and in his spare time while he was recuperating, he had picked wild flowers and woven them into a garland for her. Her beautiful face was dyed with a faint red glow, and she was more moving than any woman he had ever seen. Then he married her and she gave birth to children for him. If he wasn't Lin Yuan, if he didn't have those responsibilities, Yili silently watched the blood-stained sword cut across his neck. The long sword fell to the ground with a clang, and the man in the dragon robe slowly fell down. Yili remembered that she had lived with Princess Helan for a while. She remembered that her cousin, the princess of the northern region and the former queen of Ren Qining, was called the Bright Pearl. Princess. Leng Haoyu and the others came forward and glanced at the person on the ground. Leng Haoyu couldn't help but sigh. "I didn't expect that he would actually." Yili sighed softly and said, "Give him a proper burial. He can be considered a formidable person. He will be posthumously conferred the title of Prince Chongqing, and be buried together with the queen of the northern region." Shuo Jing hesitated for a moment before saying, "Princess, the ashes of the queen of the northern region and several princesses and princes have been brought back to the northern region by Princess Helan." Yili thought for a moment. "Set up a cenotaph for him. Send someone to send the ashes to the northern region. Let Princess Helan do as she pleases." After saying that, Yili, who was somewhat dispirited, no longer looked at the person on the ground and turned back to the camp. August 15th. It was time to go back. Let Princess Helan do as she pleases. Shuo Jing smacked his lips. With Queen Helan's hatred for Ren Qining, she would scatter his ashes on the road and let people trample on them. After a while, someone came to see Ren Qining's body and took it away. The lakeside regained its tranquility. After a long time, a blue-clothed man appeared at the lakeside. He stared at the dark red bloodstains on the ground for a long time before reaching out to pick up the sword on the ground. He lifted up the hem of his robe and sliced open the sword. The blue-clothed man slowly wiped the dried blood on the sword and softly sighed. "I really didn't expect that you would actually. I originally thought that there would be a battle between you and me, but it turned out that I hadn't even seen you seriously." The blue-clothed man casually threw away the cloth in his hand, flicked his sleeves, and left. The blood-stained blue cloth fluttered in the breeze and was blown into the rippling lake. It was slowly soaked, and blood slowly spread out in the lake. In the Mahist army's tent, Yili raised her head to look at the blue-clothed man in front of her. Her gaze paused on the sword in his hand for a moment before she asked, "What are your plans?" Tan Jiji smiled indifferently and said, If Wang Fei intends to continue to lock me up, it doesn't matter. If Wang Fei doesn't have this intention, then I want to leave. Yili raised an eyebrow and said with a faint smile, "Where are you going? Are you going to find a new place to start again?" Tan Jiji shook his head and said, "Maybe I'll walk around, or go to the western regions, or go out to sea." Yili looked at him with interest and said, "What about your ambitions? You don't want it anymore?" Tan Jiji said with a bitter smile, "With Prince Ding and Wang Fei here, no one else can interfere with my ambitions. This one still has some self-awareness." Seeing his end. "I originally didn't understand, but now I feel that it doesn't matter anymore. Two people, the same name, the same mission and responsibility, but different experiences and different solutions." Seeing Ren Qining end up like this, Tan Jiji, who had always felt that he hated him deeply, felt a bit more sympathy for him. His original ambitions also became a bit more dull. "The winds and clouds of the world come from my generation. Once I enter the Jianghu, time passes quickly. Talking and laughing about the ambitions of the emperor is not better than drinking in the mortal world," Yili softly said. Tan Jiji was slightly lost in thought, but then he smiled and nodded in praise. Wang Fei's temperament, such insight. Tan Jiji is ashamed. From now on, there is only Tan Jiji, there is no Lin Yuan. Wang Fei, this one will take his leave. Yili looked at him, "Don't you plan to go back and see Dr. Lin?" Tan Jiji shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "Forget it. Father probably doesn't want to see an unfilial son like me. In the future, please take care of me, Wang Fei." Yili nodded and said, "Fine, you decide." Tan Jiji didn't say anything else and cupped his hands. "Goodbye. I won't see you out." Seeing Tan Jiji leave, Qin Feng, who was behind Yili, whispered, "Wang Fei, are we really letting him go here? If he has any other ideas, it will be troublesome." Yili shook her head and said, "Tan Jiji is a smart person. He knows that he can't do anything, so he won't be obsessed with this. But, if he does anything else, there is no need to ask, just kill him." Qin Feng nodded. Tan Jiji was alone and had offended Imo Jingli. It wouldn't be easy for him to do anything. Wang Fei, Tan Jiji and Ren Qining, who is the orphan of the previous dynasty? Qin Feng asked curiously. Yili lightly shook her head and said with a smile, "I don't know. Who is and who isn't, what's the point?" Qin Feng thought for a moment and nodded with a smile, "Wang Fei is right. Who really cared who was and who wasn't? If they were ambitious, even if they killed Tan Jiji, there would be a third and fourth Lin Yuan, Wang Yuan, Zhao Yuan." Chapter 846. Princess Ding Yili had defeated the Northern Territory King Ren Qining within a month. In 2 months, she had completely pacified the entire northeast region. The border with the Northern Territory Brute tribe had returned to where it was in the Dechu state. However, the returned territory and people were no longer citizens of the Dechu state. Instead, they were now under the king's manor. Even though the rulers of large countries like Great Chu, Xiling, and northern tribes could see that the foundation of the north was not stable and that there were many hidden dangers within, but there were still millions of people. Ding Wang Fei was able to pacify them in less than 3 months. It was shocking. From then on, Princess Ding Yili's achievements in the field of martial prowess did not belong to any of the past generals. The people below the Prince Ding mansion and outside the newly pacified Purple Thorns Pass revered Princess Ding like a god. In the western tomb's genom of Gojoseon Palace, Lei Jinting was studying the map on the table with his head lowered. Ever since Infinite Boundless Mountain and Imo Jingli had gotten together, Imo Jingli had actually begun to vaguely show signs of provocation towards the western tomb. Infinite Boundless Mountain did indeed have some ability. In a few confrontations, they had caused Lei Jinting to suffer a few small losses. This had also strengthened Enchanting's determination to destroy Infinite Boundless Mountain. Below him, young Master Enchanting was sitting peacefully in his white robes. Even though Infinite Boundless Mountain was hidden deep within the mountains and had a natural formation as cover, young Master Enchanting's face did not have the slightest trace of worry. He was just leisurely sipping his tea, waiting for Enchanting's reaction. "Father! Father!" Enchanting hurried in with a letter in his hand. Enchanting could not help but frown. In terms of age, Enchanting was about the same as Su Qingchen and Emo Xiuyao. However, not to mention their strategies and methods, their personalities were far from being as calm and collected as these two. It was no wonder that Enchanting had always been worried about his only son. In fact, Enchanting's ability and strategy might not be as good as Emo Xiuyao and Su Qingchen, but he definitely wasn't any worse than people like Emo Jingli and Ren Qining. It was just that he was always under his father's shadow and lacked experience, so his personality was slightly lacking compared to others. "Young Master Qingchen is still here. How can you make such a big fuss? What happened?" Enchanting asked in a deep voice. Enchanting also saw Su Qingchen sitting at the side as soon as he entered the room. He was stunned and secretly regretted his rashness just now. However, being scolded by his father in front of Su Qingchen, his expression turned ugly. Su Qingchen put down the teacup and said with a smile, "Since Duke Rui is here, there must be something important. I will take my leave first." Glancing at the letter in Enchanting's hands, Enchanting could roughly guess what it was about. He shook his head and said, "Young Master Qingchen is not an outsider. Just say it." Enchanting hesitated for a moment before handing the letter to Enchanting. "Princess Ding destroyed Ren Qining's million-strong army. Ren Qining committed suicide." What? Even someone like Enchanting, who had been through many storms, couldn't help but be stunned. He couldn't blame his son for losing his composure just now. Originally, while Enchanting didn't think highly of the alliance between the northern tribes and the northern territories, he was still happy to see it happen. After all, while he was cooperating with the Prince Ding Mansion to deal with Infinite Boundless Mountain, he also had to guard against any sneak attacks from the Prince Ding Mansion. With the northern territories holding them back, he was much more at ease. But who would have thought that just a mere Yili would be able to destroy the northern territories in just 2 months? Emo Xiuyao hadn't even had to lift a finger. Was it the Prince Ding Mansion that was too strong, or the northern territories that were too weak? Thinking of this, Enchanting's expression as he looked at Su Qingchen also changed somewhat. Su Qingchen, however, seemed oblivious to it, her expression indifferent. Enchanting calmed himself down before smiling at Su Qingchen. "Princess Ding is indeed a female hero of her generation. I must congratulate young Master Qingchen and the Prince Ding Mansion." Su Qingchen smiled mildly. While stabilizing the northern territories could be considered a stroke of good luck that couldn't be replicated, Su Qingchen was still extremely happy that his cousin had successfully accomplished such a great thing. Nodding with a slight smile, she said, "Many thanks to Prince Li is still young. It is also her luck that she was able to achieve such a feat by accident." Beside them, Enchanting's mouth couldn't help but twitch upon hearing this. Princess Ding had only been famous for less than 10 years. Guarding the Eternal Forest, suppressing the Northwest, sweeping through the Western Tomb and now stabilizing the Northern Territories. Even his royal father had suffered a loss at her hands. Such a person was still young. When she was no longer young, how could she still live? Su Qingchen probably also felt that such humble words sounded more like bragging to others. Naturally, she changed the topic with a smile. "The matters of the Northern Territories are far away. Let's not bother about them. Instead, let's talk about how we should deal with Infinite Boundless Mountain. If our two families can't even take down Infinite Boundless Mountain, this Su will really have no face to return to Glass City." Enchanting's and Fing's expressions also brightened. The Northern Territories was already a foregone conclusion. There was no point in dwelling on it. It was just that the borders of the Northern Territories would have to be carefully rearranged. However, before their eyes, if it were the tens of thousands of mighty soldiers of Jinan Palace as well as the wise young Master Qinchin, they wouldn't be able to take down a mere infinite boundless mountain. That Rinqining wasn't the number one joke under the heavens. They were. Moreover, Mo Jingli relied on infinite boundless mountain support to provoke them time and time again at the Cloud Mist River. Enchanting definitely wouldn't be able to tolerate this. Now that infinite boundless mountain was not destroyed, the Prince Ding mansion would only lose some face. To the western tomb, it was already a great enemy. Enchanting nodded. Young Master Qinchin's words make sense. I wonder if young Master Qinchin has any thoughts on the natural grand formation within the infinite boundless mountain range. Su Qinchin frowned. Although I have already seen the map, it is still incomplete at the end of the day. I, however, have some thoughts. However, I need to personally head to Infinite Boundless Mountain in order to verify them. Enchanting said, there have been some small matters by the Cloud Mist River recently. I cannot accompany young master there. Quan He will lead 50,000 elite soldiers to accompany young master to Infinite Boundless Mountain. What does young master think? Su Qinchin nodded, cupping his hands towards Fing, smiling, then I will have to trouble Duke Rui. Fing hurriedly returned the greeting, it is my duty. Young Master Qinchin need not mind it. After sending Su Qinchin off, Enchanting and his son were speechless for a long time in the study. Fing asked somewhat worriedly, Father, are we just going to leave the matters of the Northern Territories to their own devices? Enchanting smiled bitterly, how are we going to manage it? The Northern Territories have nothing to do with our Western Tomb in the first place. Also, it was the Northern Territories themselves who first provoked the Prince Ding mansion. Even if they were to perish, they would only be seeking their own deaths. It's just that, even I did not expect that this Yili would actually be so. Fing could not help but sigh in admiration. Princess Ding is truly not something that any woman in this world can compare to. Even those few from Infinite Boundless Mountain are probably worlds apart when compared to Princess Ding. Enchanting looked at the letter that Fing had presented to him. Princess Ding has conferred upon Ren Qining the title of Duke of Chongqing. Such grace. Back in the Western Tomb, Ren Qining had plotted to assassinate Yili, which had also directly led to the Western Tomb's nobles being massacred by Mo Xiuyao until rivers of blood flowed. For such a person, it was already rather good that Yili had not seen his corpse torn apart and tossed into the wilderness. She had actually conferred upon him the title of Duke, and given him a noble burial. Chapter 847. Even though Ding Wangfei is a woman, she already has the heart and bearing of a man who can turn the clouds with one hand and look down on the world. Enchanting sighed softly. The father and son sighed again and again. In the end, they could only sigh at Mo Xiuyao's good fortune. Jiangnan, the Chu State, in the regent's mansion. When Mo Jingli received the news, he was not as calm as Enchanting and his son. With a wave of his hand, he swept the things on the desk to the ground. He clutched the letter in his hand so tightly that the veins on the back of his hand popped out. Yili. What a good Yili. No matter how much power he had now, Mo Jingli felt extremely unwilling at all times. Perhaps he had understood a long time ago that abandoning that woman back then was his greatest loss and regret in this life. And now, every inch of the Prince Ding mansion's achievements seemed to indicate his incompetence. The news that Yili had pacified the north was even more like a mockery to him. What are you making a fuss about? Dongfang Yu appeared at the door of the study. She had taken off her snow-white clothes and put on the beautiful clothes of the regent's consort. Dongfang Yu's originally beautiful face was now even more graceful and luxurious. Just by looking at the cold and seemingly mocking gaze that she was looking at Mo Jingli with, one would not think that they were a newlywed couple. Mo Jingli's face darkened. He said unhappily, "What are you doing here?" Dongfang Yu ignored his expression. She calmly stepped into the study, crossed the messy floor, and stood in front of Mo Jingli. She said with a smile that was not a smile, "Are you angry because the Prince Ding mansion and Yili destroyed Renqining?" Mo Jingli snorted softly and said mockingly, "The infinite boundless mountains news is indeed fast." Dongfang Yu raised her eyebrows, saying, "The infinite boundless mountains news is naturally fast. What's so strange about that? I already knew about this news 10 days ago." Mo Jingli's expression changed. He grabbed Dongfang Yu and said, 10 days ago. Why don't you say it?" Dongfang Yu slapped his hand away casually and laughed disdainfully. "Why should I say it? Do you think that you can control the infinite boundless mountain just because I married you? Mo Jingli, you think too highly of yourself. My master agreed to assist you because he had no other choice. Why don't you take a look at what kind of material you are?" Mo Jingli's face contorted as he was mocked by his own wife. He pushed Dongfang Yu away and scolded angrily, "Slut. You." Dongfang Yu interrupted him unceremoniously. "My master told me to tell you, don't always make your own decisions. Why don't you take a look at your current strength? If you really provoke Enchanting, you won't be able to bear the consequences." With that, Dongfang Yu turned and walked out of the door, ignoring Mo Jingli's expression. Mo Jingli stared coldly at Dongfang Yu's back as she disappeared through the door. He clenched his teeth, saying, "Dong Fang Yu." No matter how much Mo Jingli clenched his teeth, he was still unable to change the fact that he was currently unable to touch Dongfang Yu. When he had planned to marry Dongfang Yu back then, he had only wanted the power of the infinite boundless mountain. Now that he had it, he also understood why Mo Xiaoyao had been so dismissive of the infinite boundless mountain's power. Why had the always ambitious Enchanting not interfered in the affairs of the infinite boundless mountain from the start? That's right, the infinite boundless mountain's power was indeed shocking. With the help of the infinite boundless mountain's power, the Dechu state's power had increased greatly in just a few short months. Even if they were to clash with Enchanting now, they might still be able to put up a fight. But at the same time, he was also restricted by the infinite boundless mountain. Many of his decisions had to be approved by Dongfang Hui, and Dongfang Yu was even more hateful towards him, finding fault with him everywhere. The dignified regent of the Dechu state was actually restricted by 2 women. Such humiliation, no matter how great his power was, could not make up for the anger in Mo Jingli's heart. Just as everyone was discussing, Yili had already finished dealing with the affairs of Chongqing City. She threw the rest of the trivial matters to Leng Huai and Leng Haoyu, and brought Zhuo Jing and the others into the pass, heading towards the Mahist army camp where Mo Xiaoyao was. Mo Xiaoyao had long been waiting outside the door. When he saw Yili and the others riding over, he immediately flew up to welcome them, landing on Yili's horse. Yili's horse was also a Fergana horse that was 1 in 10,000. Even when a person landed on it, it did not panic in the slightest, and continued to walk forward steadily. Mo Xiaoyao sat behind Yili, one hand around her waist, the other holding the reins. The horse whinnied and turned to run in another direction. Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, and the others looked at each other, not knowing whether to chase or not. A moment later, Qin Feng shook his head and said, "Let's go back first. With the prince and the princess together, nothing will happen." The prince clearly wanted to be alone with the princess. If they did not know what was good for them and followed, wouldn't the prince remember them in his heart? Who knew when they would be in big trouble? The others also felt that this was very reasonable, and they rode their horses in the direction of the camp. When the time came, the generals who were waiting outside the camp to welcome the princess' return were left waiting for nothing. They looked at each other and could only rub their noses and go back. Mo Xiuyao and Yili rode the same horse. After a while, Mo Xiuyao did not pay attention to it. He allowed it to roam on its own, and even stopped to nibble on the grass on the ground. Mo Xiuyao only pulled Yili into his arms, his chin resting on her shoulder as he rubbed intimately. "Princess Li, you finally came back. I missed you so much." Yili helplessly turned her head and kissed his face. She leaned into his arms and said softly, "I also missed you." Mo Xiuyao's eyes lit up. He lifted her small chin and stared at those warm and red lips as he fiercely kissed her. "Princess Li, Xiuyao, don't make a fuss." Yili was frightened by his sudden passion. Mo Xiuyao was not willing to stop. He raised a hand to hold the back of her head and deepened the kiss. Yili was helpless. She sighed inside and raised a hand to wrap around his neck. She also sank into an intimate entanglement. Mo Xiuyao hugged Yili and leaned to the side. The two of them immediately fell off the back of the horse. Yili reflexively hugged Mo Xiuyao. The two of them landed on the grass and rolled a long way before they stopped. Mo Xiuyao looked down at the blushing face below him and planted a series of lingering kisses. He buried his head in Yili's hair and laughed softly. Princess Li, silver and black hair tangled together. It was exceptionally eye-catching, but it also seemed like they were meant to be tangled together. Yili smiled and said softly, "Xiuyao, I'm back." Mo Xiuyao helped Yili up and the two of them sat side by side on the grass. It turned out that Yili's horse had been strolling casually and had arrived at a call not far away. The two of them sat on the call and looked down. From afar, they could see the northern tribe's army camp. Princess Li managed to pacify the northern region in a short 2 months. Your husband, on the other hand, has not made any progress in these 2 months. I'm so ashamed. Mo Xiuyao looked at Yili and laughed mockingly. Yili reached out and pinched his handsome face. She smiled and said, "Take the northern tribes in the northern region as an example. Why didn't Yellow Yi fight you to the death?" Although they were two different countries, the difference between the northern tribes and the northern region was like the difference between clouds and mud. The northern tribes had been established for hundreds of years. Every dynasty had invaded the Central Plains. Although they had never truly attacked the Central Plains, the northern tribes were the biggest threat to the Central Plains. Moreover, the climate of the northern tribes was harsh and the people were valiant. Their martial spirit was much stronger than that of the northern region. It could be said that although Yellow Yi had formed an alliance with the northern region, he had only treated Ren Qining as a pawn to contain the Mahist army. He had never treated him as an equal. Chapter 848. Mo Xiuyao gently rubbed his face against Yili's and smiled. "He doesn't want to fight me to the death, he only wants my life." Yellow Yi still wanted to return to the northern tribes to fight for the position of king of the northern tribes for Yellow Hong. Why would he fight Mo Xiuyao to the death? Unfortunately, in this world, there were many people who wanted Mo Xiuyao's life, but Mo Xiuyao was still alive, and the more he lived, the better. Yellow Hong and Princess Ronghua have already returned. Yili asked. Mo Xiuyao nodded, "That's right, but Helianzhen has already arrived. He even brought 800,000 men with him. Right now, there are at least 1,300,000 men in the northern tribes camp." So many. Yili frowned slightly. No wonder Mo Xiuyao had been talking for so long but had not made any progress. Not to mention the soldiers and horses that the Prince Ding mansion had taken back from the Dechu state, the Mahist army's elite soldiers numbered less than 1 million, and they also had to guard the various places. In terms of soldiers and horses, they could not compete with the northern tribes. Mo Xiaoyao smiled coldly, the more the better. I promised Yelu Hong that I would not touch the northern tribes' foundations, but since they came here of their own accord, they can forget about going back. Seeing the killing intent that flashed across Mo Xiaoyao's face, Yili tenderly kissed his cold cheeks and said softly, "Don't worry, we will avenge Big Brother." Mo Xiaoyao nodded, "Li, thank you." The two led their horses down the hill. At the foot of the hill, there was a small village. There were very few people in the small village. The villagers' eyes were dim, and they were as thin as bones. Their ragged clothes were unbearable to look at. Yili couldn't help but feel a lump in her throat when she thought of how the people under the rule of the Northwest Prince Ding Mansion lived in peace and contentment, and then looked at these exhausted and despairing people. Seeing her staring at those people in a daze, Mo Xiaoyao could not help but sigh softly. He pulled her into his arms and promised in a low voice, "We will definitely get rid of the northern tribes as soon as possible." Yili was a little puzzled as she asked, "Why are these people not leaving this place?" Mo Xiaoyao shook his head. "Where can we go if we leave this place?" Even though the Prince Ding Mansion was able to accommodate them, many of them starved to death on their journey. Besides, the Northwest was too small to accommodate so many people. Which part of the world isn't in chaos? Even if they fled to the South was not peaceful either. There were also many elderly, women, and children. Firstly, it was difficult to leave their homeland, and secondly, they did not have the ability to travel so far. This village was the same. If the young people did not join the army, they would have fled. Those left behind were the elderly who could not leave, and the young and helpless children. They were already considered lucky. More than half of the people in the north had already been killed and the northern tribes invaded the Great Pass. Villages like this are everywhere. Saying this, Mo Xiaoyao could not help but feel sad. When the northern tribes invaded the Dechu state, he was planning to attack Xiling naturally. There were no soldiers in the northwest to help the Dechu state resist the northern tribes. Even though the Prince Ding Mansion had severed all ties with the Dechu state at that time, they had not done anything wrong in terms of reputation. But facing these worried and numb people, Mo Xiaoyao's heart was not made of iron. He could not help but feel a trace of guilt. "The two of you, are the two of you His Highness Prince Ding and Wang Fei?" The two of them led their horses and walked slowly. Suddenly, an old trembling voice came from the side of the road. The two of them looked over and saw a 70-year-old white-haired man in ragged clothes by the side of the road. He was supporting himself with a wooden staff and trembling as he looked at the two of them. Mo Xiaoyao looked silently at the old man for a while before asking, "How do you know?" The old man said emotionally, "I heard that His Highness Prince Ding is in his prime but has a head of white hair, and I also heard that Prince Ding's army camp is just a few dozen li away. Prince Wang Fei, I beg you to save the people of the Dechu state." As he spoke, the old man's staff tilted and he knelt on the ground, tears streaming down his face. Not far away, a few villagers heard the old man's words and hurriedly ran over. In a short while, they all knelt on the ground, crying. Yili looked around. As expected, the people present were either old people in their 60s or 70s or children of a few years old. There were also some women and children. Other than the ignorant children, everyone had a deep and worried expression on their faces. When they looked at Yili and Mo Xiaoyao, they had a bit of hope. Yili bent down to help the old man up. She was also speechless for a while. Tilting her head to look at Mo Xiaoyao, she saw that he was also silent. Yili asked in a light voice, "Elder, are you willing to leave this place?" The old man shook his head and said, "We are already people with one foot in the grave. Where can we go? I only hope that Wang Yi and Wang Fei can chase those thieves out so that they can take revenge for our fellow villagers who died so tragically." So that we, the children who don't know anything yet, can grow up safely and peacefully. Us old people, if we die, then we die. Yili looked at the sallow complexions of these people and knew how hard their days were. She sighed and said, I will have people send some food over later. In another 2 months, it will be winter. But if it is possible, you should move back a little. When the autumn harvest comes, the northern tribe's soldiers will definitely come out to steal the food. In a few days, the 2 armies will be at war and this place will not be peaceful. The old man was hesitant. Their village was closest to the front line of the 2 armies and was often harassed by the northern tribe's soldiers. Luckily, the northern tribe's soldiers were no longer like when they first entered the pass and killed everyone they saw. But these people were either old and weak or young and ignorant. Where could they go? Mo Xiaoyao said in a low voice, about 60 li back, there are a few villages. There are not many people left. You can live there. The battle line will not move back. You can live there without worry. Tomorrow, I will send people to escort you there. Mo Xiaoyao's words were equivalent to a promise. No matter what happened at the front line, as long as the Mahist army had a single soldier, they would not retreat a single step. Hearing this, everyone was overjoyed. Tears of joy flowed down their faces as they kowtowed to Yili and Mo Xiaoyao. Yili helplessly helped the old man up and pulled up a small child beside him. The child was about 5 or 6 years old. He raised his head and looked at Yili without fear. Yili smiled at him. The child immediately blushed and grabbed the old man's sleeve to hide behind him. Yili thought of Mo Xiaobao, Ling Junhan, Su Jirue and the rest who were in high spirits in the Prince Ding mansion. Then she looked at the small and skinny child in front of her who was wearing old clothes that did not fit him. Because of what they saw at the foot of the mountain, the 2 did not have the mood to wander around and could only return to the camp together. When they returned to the camp, all the generals came out to welcome them. At this time, other than Zhang Qilan guarding Xiling, General Yuan Pei guarding Feihong Pass, Murongshan guarding Chujing, and Ling Huai far away in Chongqing, all the famous generals of the Mahist army were gathered in the camp. There were more than 10 of them. Princess Consort, you have pacified the north. I congratulate you. Young Master Feng San was dressed in flamboyant red clothes. He was not as handsome as the generals in their battle robes. But he was elegant and had an extraordinary aura. Yili smiled faintly and saluted, it is all thanks to everyone. Young Master Feng San, you flatter me. Chapter 849. All the generals congratulated Yili in unison. They were already very respectful of this Princess Ding. Now that she had pacified the north, no one in the Mahist army dared to doubt Princess Ding's abilities. With Yili's return, Mo Xiaoyao was in a good mood. He dismissed everyone, leaving only Lu Jingxian and the others to discuss matters. Everyone couldn't help but ask about Yili's matters in the north. Yili did not want to dampen everyone's spirits and could only pick some important matters to talk about. Everyone sighed at Ren Qi Ning's bad luck and the Prince Ding mansion's good luck. As expected, the heavens were on the side of the Prince Ding mansion. On the other hand, they also sighed at Wang Fei's methods and foresight. They may be able to pacify the north, but to take down the north so easily, it could be said to be without shedding a drop of blood. There probably weren't 2 people present who could do it. Hearing Yili finish, Mo Xiaoyao thought for a moment and said, it's enough to have Ling Huai and Ling Haoyu in Chongqing. Later, let's have Yisu come back. Yili raised an eyebrow and said, it seems that this side is a bit troublesome. There are many fierce generals in the army, and Yisu has to come back. Lu Jingxian and the others knew that Yisu was one of Yili's people and said with a smile, Wang Fei is right. Yisu has been neglected by the king of the northern tribes these years. It's rare that he hasn't been dispirited, and has cultivated a few talents. Right now, the northern tribes has millions of soldiers, and many fierce generals. I've heard that General He's ability to lead troops is the best among the young generals. If he can come, it is a good thing. Marquis Nan stroked his beard and said with a smile, yes, Wang Fei has many capable people under her command. Right now, among the young generals, General He Su is better. Instead, it's my son who's a good-for-nothing. After saying this, Marquis Nan glared at Fu Zhao as if he expected better from him. Fu Zhao rubbed his nose innocently. It wasn't that he didn't work hard, it was just that this world was full of evildoers. Yili laughed and said, Southern Marquis is exaggerating. Shitzi is a rare talent in both pen and sword. How can He Su compare to him? He lowered his head and thought for a moment before saying, that's good too. General Leng Hui is a person of virtue and prestige, and Leng Haoyu has a flexible personality. With them overseeing Chongqing, I'm sure that the areas outside of Redbud Pass will quickly return to their former prosperity. On the other hand, what kind of famous general is there in the northern region barracks that even General Liu is afraid of? Lu Jingxian said, in the Northern Militant Army, there is a young general called Helian Pang. He should be a junior of Helian Zhen. However, in terms of using troops, Helian Zhen was probably slightly inferior to him. Currently, the Northern Militant Army had Yelu Yi, Helian Zhen, and Helian Pang, as well as millions of elite soldiers. That's quite troublesome. Although it was a bit troublesome, Lu Jingxian's face didn't show the slightest hint of annoyance. Instead, he was eager to fight. Since Yelu Hong has already returned to the Northern Militant Army, Yelu Yi is now in charge of the army. I wonder if Yelu Hong will be successful after returning to the Northern Militant Army. If everything goes well, Yelu Yi won't be able to hold on for long. Yi Li pondered. Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows in disdain and said, if Yelu Hong can't even handle such a small matter, he might as well die. Since Miss Li has also returned, I also want to meet Helian Zhen. I want to see if he's still the same as before. Speaking of Helian Zhen, Mo Xiuyao's eyes couldn't help but become a bit more vicious. It wasn't that Helian Zhen was a genius, but that the Prince Ding mansion hadn't suffered a single defeat in over 100 years. However, it just so happened that he had fallen into Helian Zhen's hands. Although it wasn't a battle loss, a loss was still a loss. It had to be said that the battle from over a decade ago was the most humiliating one the Prince Ding mansion had fought in over 100 years. It was also the battle where they suffered the most losses. How could Mo Xiuyao not remember Helian Zhen? Not long after Mo Xiuyao remembered Helian Zhen also didn't forget Mo Xiuyao. That year, Helian Zhen was the #1 general of the Northern Militant Army. He was about to defeat the Prince Ding mansion and become the war god of the Northern Militant Army. However, Mo Xiuyao, a young man who wasn't even 18 years old, suddenly appeared out of nowhere and burned him until he threw away his armor and fled in defeat. In that battle, the Northern Militant Army didn't invest any less soldiers than now. They were about to achieve a complete victory, but in the end, they were almost completely wiped out. Although Mo Xiuyao also paid a heavy price, the Northern Militant Army's losses were also extremely heavy. In the Northern Tribes camp, Yelu Yi sat on the main seat, and below him sat a white-bearded old general in his 50s and a muscular young man in his late 20s, exuding a valiant aura. However, he was different from the typical Northern Militant Army soldier. His eyes were calm and sharp, rarely seen in the Northern Militant Army soldiers. These two people were the Northern Militant Army's General Helian Zhen and his adopted son Helian Peng, who had come to reinforce Yelu Yi. Originally, before Mo Xiuyao and Helian Zhen arrived, the two armies fought a small battle every 3 days and a big battle every 5 days. When the commander-in-chief arrived, everyone calmed down and became more cautious in their attacks. In this half a month, neither side took the initiative to provoke the other. I've said it before, Enchanting isn't good enough. We should have found Enchanting as an ally from the start. Helianjen said in a low voice. Yiluye's expression was gloomy as he said coldly, I really didn't expect Enchanting to be so incompetent. He was actually forced to commit suicide by a woman in less than 3 months. His entire army was almost wiped out. The reason why we chose him was because of the geography, but also because Enchanting is too ambitious and cunning. He is not as easy to control as Enchanting. Helianjen said, then what should we do now? The 7th prince has made a military pledge to the king that he will not return to the northern militant army until he destroys the Mahist army. Now that Princess Ding has pacified the north, soon, the Prince Ding mansion will send more troops here. I'm afraid it's too late to join forces with Enchanting now. Now Enchanting was not without worries. Mo Jingli was also eyeing him covetously in Jiangnan. In Xiling, the Emperor of Xiling was also watching Enchanting at all times, waiting for him to reveal a flaw so that he could seize power in one fell swoop. If Enchanting were to fight to the death with the Prince Ding mansion at this time, it would be hard to say who would win if both sides joined forces. But no matter who won or lost, the unlucky one would be Enchanting himself. Yiluye sighed and said, fortunately, our military strength is far greater than Mo Xiuyao's. We still have a chance of winning. Helianpeng, who had been sitting silently at the side, raised his head and said, Prince, you may not be right. Yiluye raised his eyebrows and said, what do you mean? Helianpeng said, although our military strength is far greater than the Mahist armies, but Central was originally the Mahist army's territory. As long as they want to expand their army, I'm afraid they can gather millions of troops in the blink of an eye. Even if they are not as elite as the original Mahist army, they will still be somewhat useful. Moreover, in this general's opinion, Mo Xiuyao is not a person without foresight. It is impossible for him not to know that the Mahist army's military strength is far less than the other countries. Why is it that he has not implemented his conscription at all? Yiluye could not help but frown. He stared seriously at Helianpeng and asked, You mean to say that Mo Xiuyao is hiding his strength? Helianpeng nodded and said, that's right. This general believes that the Mahist army's military strength is definitely more than what we know. I'm afraid that Mo Xiuyao has hidden a large number of troops in places that we do not know about, waiting to deal a fatal blow to our army. Your Highness must not lower your guard. Chapter 850. Yiluye nodded, he wasn't really a condescending person. When facing Mo Xiuyao, he was willing to be more cautious. Yiluye said, Helian, what do you think? Helianpeng said, I plan to test the strength of the Mahist army. Yiluye looked at him with interest and said, how do you plan to test it? In the past half year, our army has fought with the Mahist army dozens of times. I can only say that the Mahist army is indeed worthy of being the iron-blooded army that has shaken the world for more than 200 years. When mentioning the fighting strength of the Mahist army, even Yiluye couldn't help but sigh in admiration. The physical strength of the people of the Central Plains was not as good as the nomads. Although many people of the Central Plains practiced internal strength and martial arts, they could fight 1 against 10. But in the end, practicing martial arts required time and not everyone could practice high-level martial arts. So for a long time, the fighting strength of the Central Plains was always weaker than the northern tribes. But the Mahist army was clearly an exception. Every soldier of the Mahist army had strength that was completely different from the northern tribes. This made the battle more intense every time the two armies clashed. Helianpeng thought for a moment and said, Qilin. Qilin. When these words came out, even Yiluye and Helianjin couldn't help but be moved. Qilin hadn't been an army for a long time, but they had made many outstanding contributions. In many of the great victories of the Mahist army, their shadows could be seen, but very few people in the world had actually seen them. He was like a ghost. Yili Yi said, Qi Lin was created by the Ding King's wife and is also the most mysterious troop of the Mahist army led by the Ding King's wife. Helian Peng wants to challenge the Ding King's wife. Helian Peng raised his eyebrows and said, can't I? Yili Yi smiled and said, it's not that you can't. I thought that Helian Peng was arrogant and wanted to directly challenge Mo Xiuyao. Helian Peng said indifferently, this general will not look down on women, especially when this woman is the imperial consort. Furthermore, I don't know why, but I have a feeling that if we don't get rid of this Qi Lin, the northern tribes will fall into their hands sooner or later. Yili Yi trembled slightly, asking, how do you know? Helian Peng muttered to himself for a moment before saying, I don't know either. I just have this feeling. Ever since Qi Lin appeared, he had always caught the enemy off guard. Every time he attacked, he would always attack the enemy's vital points and never miss. We, the warriors of the northern tribes, may not fear anyone on the battlefield, but it is our weakness to deal with enemies that come and go like ghosts. Yili Yi nodded in agreement. After dealing with the Mahist army for so long, he naturally knew about this. However, the strengths and weaknesses of the northern tribes were accumulated over thousands of years and could not be changed in a short period of time. How does Helian Peng plan to deal with Qi Lin? Helian Zhen smiled and said, ever since Qi Lin appeared, Peng has been very interested in these people. Therefore, we have also trained a group of people to deal with Qi Lin. Hearing this, Yili Yi was really surprised. He looked at Helian Peng and asked, really? All these years, his imperial father had been very displeased with Helian Zhen and had even removed his military power. Under such circumstances, how could Yili Yi not be surprised that he was able to train such a group of people? If this war did not happen, this group of people who could kill an invisible people would be perfect to deal with Yelu Hong. Helian Peng's expression did not change as he nodded and said, that's right. They originally called Qi Lin a benevolent beast, but it was too weak and lacked some killing intent. This group of people, I call them Yizi. Yizi. Although Yili Yi was from the northern tribes, as a prince, he naturally had some understanding of the culture of the Central Plains. Yizi, one of the 9 sons of the dragon. It looked like a jackal and liked to kill. Although it was called a dragon, it was actually a ferocious beast. This made Yili Yi curious. Helian Peng actually had some understanding of the culture of the Central Plains. That's right. Helian Zhen said loudly, back then, I was careless and lost to Mo Xiuyao, that ignorant brat. If I can't get rid of this humiliation, I won't be able to face the ancestors of the Helian family even if I die. For this day, I have waited for more than 10 years. Rest assured, 7th Prince, this time, we will definitely make sure that the Mahist army will never be able to rise again. Yili Yi naturally knew of Helian Zhen's hatred towards Mo Xiuyao. It could be said that half of Helian Zhen's life was spent in the Prince Ding mansion and also in the Prince Ding mansion. Half of his life was spent in the military, and his greatest achievement was defeating the Mahist army and killing Mo Xiuan. However, his greatest defeat was also losing to the Mahist army, losing to Mo Xiuyao. Nodding, Yili Yi said in a low voice, then I will have to trouble Uncle and Helian. I will quietly listen to the good news. What does Helian Peng plan to do? Helian Peng pondered for a moment and said, Yili has just returned, she definitely won't be ready to guard against us so quickly. What I mean is, tonight, we will attack at night. Yili Yi hesitated for a moment, are you confident? Helian Peng smiled and said, rest assured, Your Highness, it's just a test. In that case, it's approved. Chapter 851. Late at night, outside the Mahist army's camp, a group of agile men dressed in black silently snuck in. Although this was not the main camp of the Mahist army that Prince Ding personally oversaw, the main camp was only 20 or so li away and was closely connected to the main camp. Moreover, this was the place where most of the rations were stored. It was not an exaggeration to say that this was the Mahist army's frontline supply granary, and the tight security was self-evident. However, these people were able to sneak in without alerting anyone, and this was enough to show how outstanding their abilities were. In the quiet camp, other than the patrolling soldiers coming and going, all of the soldiers had already fallen asleep. In the darkness of the night, only the cawing of the night crows could be heard from time to time, making people feel a sense of unease. The leader raised his hand to stop the people behind him from moving forward, and looked around vigilantly. Suddenly, he said in a low and hurried voice, "We've been discovered, retreat." The others were also startled, and before they could react, a rain of silver arrows pierced through the night sky. Retreat. The men in black were all skilled, and almost at the same time, they scattered in all directions. The barracks were immediately lit up. A man dressed in black walked out from the darkness, and a cold smile appeared on his lips. "Since you've come, don't leave. Chase." Countless black figures streaked across the hidden corners of the camp, chasing in the direction of the fleeing black-clothed men. These men in black did not immediately escape, and instead ran all over the place, and many of them even headed towards the area where the rations were stored. It was clear that they wanted to destroy most of the Mahist army's rations in one fell swoop. It had to be known that before the army moved, the rations would move first. In this era, when two armies fought, other than fighting strength and tactics, they also competed with rations. Without rations, even if you were the strongest soldier in the world, you would only end up starving to death. Their plan was very good, but how could the Mahist army, which had been around for hundreds of years, not have considered this problem? As soon as they entered the storage area, they were surrounded by a group of equally mysterious black-clothed men. Both sides attacked each other without saying a word. Not far away from the camp, Su Qingfeng was standing at the edge of a cliff, dressed in black, looking down at the camp with a gloomy face. Standing next to him were the unrestrained Han Mingxi and the graceful Han Mingyue brothers. Behind them stood a group of men in black who were also eyeing the flickering flames of the camp not far away. "What a nice place." Han Mingxi smiled at Su Qingfeng. Originally, he and Han Mingyue had been ordered to escort the provisions over, but they didn't expect to see such a good show. Han Mingyue pondered for a moment before saying, "These people seem to act in a similar way as Qilin." Su Qingfeng said proudly, "I'm just copying the wisdom of others. Painting the skin of a tiger is difficult to paint the bones. For the northern tribes to be able to do this, it's not bad. Since they provoked us first, it's not right if we don't teach them a lesson." "Men." "Commander." A black-clothed man stepped forward and bowed. Su Qingfeng said, "There's a northern tribe's camp 60 miles away from here. Why don't you guys go and have some fun?" "Yes, Commander." The black-clothed man replied. With a wave of his hand, he disappeared into the night with the other black-clothed men. The rest of them didn't say anything else and looked down at the camp below. This place looked ordinary, but standing on the cliff, one could take in the entire camp. In this way, no matter how powerful the northern tribes were, they wouldn't be able to escape Qilin's eyes. "They're retreating." The northern tribes knew that they couldn't succeed, and they were sent here to test the waters. If they could burn the provisions of the Mahist army, it would be a good thing, but if they couldn't, it didn't matter. Seeing that they couldn't gain the upper hand, they immediately prepared to retreat. Su Qingfeng rubbed his chin and laughed. "Since they were sent here to test us, we'll just let one of them go. Kill the rest." Han Mingxi, who was standing by the side, couldn't help but twitch his mouth. Letting one of them go was more embarrassing than letting none of them go. It was obvious that he was telling the northern tribes that since they had sent someone to investigate, he would leave one person to report back to them. He was not afraid of them investigating. Originally, he thought that among the brothers of the Su family, Su Qingfeng was the kindest. He didn't expect him to be such a bad person. The northern tribes wanted to escape, so Qi Lin let them go. However, they didn't let them go. Instead, they moved the battlefield outside the camp. There were originally more than 20 black-clothed men, but they were soon split up and fought their own battles. In less than an hour, the brightly lit camp returned to silence. In the darkness, 3 black-clothed men ran frantically in the direction of the northern tribe's camp. In such a moonless night, although there were some stars, it was not enough to illuminate the path ahead. The 3 of them ran through the forest in a panic, not knowing where to go, and actually lost their way. They stopped and looked in the direction they came from. It seemed that no one was chasing them, so they heaved a sigh of relief. One of them couldn't help but say, "I didn't expect these Central Plains people to be so powerful." They were carefully trained by Helian Zhen and Helian Peng over the past few years. They were much more powerful than the average northern tribe soldiers. The people of the northern tribes were known for their martial prowess. These soldiers of the Yazzie army even looked down on the ordinary soldiers of the northern tribes, let alone the people of the Central Plains who had always been weak. However, they didn't expect the Yazzie army to be so powerful that they couldn't even gain an advantage in a one-on-one battle. They were even at a disadvantage. That's because the Central Plains people are cunning and set up an ambush. Another person refused to admit defeat. His skills were above the rest, and he wasn't at a disadvantage when fighting against the Mahist army. It was just that they were outnumbered and had no choice but to escape. Naturally, he refused to admit defeat. The remaining person couldn't help but frown and say, "We seem to be lost. It's better to return to the camp quickly." The other 2 nodded in agreement. They had been running in the forest for more than 2 hours, but they still couldn't find the way out. It was obvious that they were lost in the forest. The elite Yazzie army of the northern tribes actually got lost. What a joke! In the forest, a burst of hearty laughter came from the darkness. However, it was erratic, and no one could determine the source of the laughter. The 3 of them changed their expressions. "Who is it? How do you know about Yazzie?" Yazzie was Helian Zhen's secret trump card. Not to mention outsiders, even the king of the northern tribes and Yilu Yi didn't know about it beforehand. They didn't expect the other party to expose their identities. The person laughed and said, "How can the Mahist army not know about any barbarian who dares to step into the Central Plains?" "Qi Lin," the 3 of them said in unison. They stared at the void and the darkness with vigilance. "It's Qi Lin. Didn't you want to experience the power of my Qi Lin? Why are you leaving?" The person in the darkness laughed. The leader of the men in black said sternly, "Come out and fight if you have the ability. Do you Central Plains people only know how to sneak around?" The man in the darkness laughed coldly and said, "I'm just about to teach you a lesson." A black shadow shot out like a ray of light. The 3 men from the northern tribes didn't even get to see the person's face clearly. The man in the lead only felt a chill on his neck. A cold hand was strangling his neck. With a slight force, the man from the northern tribes made a gurgling sound and fell to the ground, lifeless. Chapter 852. The remaining 2 men from the northern tribes roared angrily and charged at the black figure. The black figure snorted and a cold light flashed. The cold light of the soft sword danced in the night like a dazzling flower. In just a moment, another person fell to the ground. The remaining man from the northern tribes was scared out of his wits. As long as one was human, one would be afraid of death. Even though the northern tribes were more courageous than the people of the Central Plains, it did not mean that they were less afraid of death. If it was on the battlefield, the two armies might not care about life and death. However, in the darkness of the night, facing this mysterious black figure and the corpses of two of his comrades lying beside him, the man from the northern tribes, who had been running for more than 2 hours, finally had a mental breakdown. He roared angrily and charged at the black figure without caring about the difference in skill. The black figure laughed coldly and appeared behind the man from the northern tribes. His palm landed on the back of the man's neck. The man from the northern tribes fell to the ground in a daze. The forest regained its peace. The man in black kept his soft sword and turned to walk out of the forest. Outside the forest, Su Qingfeng, Han Mingxi and the rest were already waiting there. Walking out of the dark forest, a handsome face was revealed under the starlight. Who else could it be but Xue Jing? Han Mingxi leaned against a tree and yawned in boredom. Just 3 escaped thieves. Is there a need for Princess Ding's most trusted aide to personally deal with them? Making a mountain out of a molehill. Xue Jing ignored Han Mingxi's mockery and said lightly, the princess consort only wants to know how strong these people are. Su Qingfeng asked curiously, how is it? They had watched the battle from beginning to end. Naturally, they could see that these people's strength was not far from Qi Lin's. He was indeed worthy of being trained by Helian Zhen after spending countless years and countless efforts. Xue Jing smiled. Their skills are not bad. However, they are lacking in other aspects. In Qi Lin's training, individual skills were important. However, it was not absolute. Among the Qilins, there were also some whose skills were only slightly better than ordinary soldiers. However, he had a specialty that no one else could match. Moreover, Qi Lin was good at teamwork. If one was surrounded by them, even if one was a top expert in the world, it would not be easy to escape. Other than that, there were also various skills training sessions. Tonight's incident where the northern tribes got lost in the forest would never happen to Qi Lin. Furthermore, the mental fortitude of these northern tribes members was not as good as the members of Qi Lin. In the past few years, Qi Lin had gradually formed a standardized system under the leadership of Qin Feng and the others. Every officially selected member had emerged from various desperate situations. He would only become stronger when encountering a strong opponent, and he would only become calmer when facing a dangerous situation instead of going crazy for no reason. Su Qingfeng nodded and said, that's good. Let's go back to... Helian Pang and Yilu Yi were sitting in the middle of the big tent, waiting for news. Yilu Yi's sword-like eyebrows furrowed, his heart a little uneasy. Since the start of the battle with the Mahist army, he had always been a little worried about Yi Li's Qi Lin. Although Qi Lin hadn't made any moves, their reputation of never missing a target cast a shadow of uneasiness in his heart. If Helian Pang's Yazi could restrain Qi Lin, he would naturally have less scruples when leading the army into battle. Looking at the sky that was about to brighten, Yilu Yi sighed in disappointment and said, looks like it's not impossible. Helian Pang's face did not show any anxiety, and said indifferently, Your Highness does not need to worry, these people's failure is expected. If the Mahist army can't even deal with this small accident, then the Mahist army is too weak. This time, I just want to know how strong the Mahist army's Qi Lin is. Hearing Helian Pang's words, Yilu Yi also relaxed. He said, Helian, it's good that you know. Although Yi Li is a woman, she is not as easy to deal with as Mo Shuyao. Helian, you must be careful. Oh. Helian Pang looked at Yilu Yi with some surprise. He was surprised that Yilu Yi valued Yi Li so much. Even if Yilu Yi did not say it, he would definitely not underestimate Yi Li. Yilu Yi smiled bitterly and shook his head, saying, I also only figured it out in the past 2 days. Ren Qining lost to Yi Li. I'm afraid that when Ren Qining first arrived in Glass City, Yi Li had already started scheming. These are all things that Mo Xiuyao and Su Qingchen cannot interfere with. Also, when Yili defeated Lei Jinting in the northwest, many people say it was an accident. However, there is a saying in the Central Plains that when many accidents are stacked together, they are no longer accidents, but premeditated. Helian Peng nodded in agreement. Your Highness is right. In the past 2 years, I have also seriously studied the battle where Yili defeated Lei Jinting. It was clearly Yili deliberately showing weakness, luring Lei Jinting's army into the hinterland and cutting off his supplies from the rear. She even gave up Xinyang City to destroy the Xiling army's most elite forces. Lei Jinting's defeat was not unjust. Princess Ding is a woman, but her foresight, scheming, decisiveness, and courage are all perfect. If not for the fact that she is a woman, I'm afraid there would be one more contender for hegemony in the Central Plains. The two of them fell silent. When they thought about the current situation, they could not help but sigh. The Central Plains was truly a land of heroes. If the northern tribes wanted to conquer the Central Plains, the road ahead would be difficult. Reporting to Your Highness, General Helian, the men we sent out last night have returned. Someone reported from outside the tent. Yilu Yi stood up and asked, how many came back? The guard outside the tent hesitated for a moment before replying, Your Highness, only one person came back. One person. Not only Yilu Yi, but even Helian Peng was shocked. Although they had talked about Yazi's defeat tonight, it could be considered a lesson for his arrogant subordinates. But even Helian Peng did not expect that only one person would come back alive. Originally, he had thought that even if these people could not defeat the Mahist army, they would at least be able to escape. Let him in. Helian Peng said in a low voice. Not long after, a black-clothed man walked in, looking disheveled. He knelt in front of Yilu Yi and Helian Peng. This subordinate greets Your Highness, General. Helian Peng frowned and asked, what happened? The black-clothed man recounted what had happened last night. It turned out that this black-clothed man was the last one to be knocked unconscious by Zhuo Jing in the forest. At that time, Zhuo Jing did not hit him too hard, so it did not take long for him to win. He stumbled out of the forest, and when he returned to the northern tribe's camp, the sky was already bright. Helian Peng and Yilu Ye's expressions turned even uglier. How was this the last one who had escaped? This last one was obviously the Mahist army deliberately letting him go so that he could report back. When the black-clothed man finished speaking, Helian Peng stood up and slashed his sword across the black-clothed man's neck. The black-clothed man's eyes widened, and he fell to the ground, dying with his eyes wide open. He did not die in the hands of the enemy, but in the end, he died in the hands of the person who had trained him. Chapter 853. Helian Peng wiped off the blood on his sword and said coldly, Since you are the only one left, there is no need to go back. Although he wanted to suppress their arrogance last night, such a crushing defeat was not a lesson for them. It was a complete blow to their morale. If they were allowed to return to Yazi and these things were spread out, it would definitely cause Yazi to have a natural fear of the Mo army and the Qilin, which would be very disadvantageous to the war. There was a saying in the Central Plains that was correct, ignorance is bliss. Your Highness, General Yi he sent someone to report that his camp was attacked last night. 2 granaries were burned. The soldier outside hurried in and reported. Yilu Ye's face darkened as he gritted his teeth and said, Qilin. Helian Peng lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, so quick to retaliate, as expected of the Mahist army. Yilu Yi said coldly, Helian, I don't care what method you use, you must get rid of Qilin for I as soon as possible. Otherwise, they will become a threat to I sooner or later. Compared to the Mahist army, provisions were more important to the northern tribe's army. Even if the Maoist army ran out of provisions, they could still think of ways to get more from other places. The area controlled by the Prince Ding mansion spanned across the original Dechu state and Xiling state. It was not considered small compared to the original Dechu state. Even if it did not include the granaries of Dechu state such as Jiangnan, it was still easy to gather provisions for a few 100,000 soldiers. However, the royal house of the northern tribes was thousands of miles away from Dechu state, and the northern tribes did not produce any provisions. They could only rob the people in the pass. However, when they first entered the pass, they killed more than half of the people in the north. After 2 years, the people in the north could be said to be less than 1 in 10. How could there be so much food for them to rob? Although he had only lost 2 small granaries, it still made Yilu Yi flustered and exasperated, and he flew into a thunderous rage. Helian Ping replied, "Seventh Prince, please rest assured. I hope you won't disappoint Yilu Yi said in a deep voice. In the Maoist army's camp, Yili couldn't help but smile after hearing Zhuo Jing's report. She said, "This Helian Peng is quite interesting." Mo Xiuyao snorted unhappily, "What's the point? I don't have that kind of skill to create those things that only know how to do it, but I don't know how to do it. Hundreds of thousands of elite soldiers have already been trained. There was no concept of special operations in this era. Other than Yili, there was no one else who could come up with a unique combat direction, combat theory, and training method." In Mo Xiuyao's opinion, Helian Peng's so-called Yazi might not even be as good as the original shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion. The most important thing was that Helian Peng didn't have a clear idea of what Yazi was used for. Now it seemed like it was purely to go against Qilin. But they were not Qilin's match. This meant that Helian Zhen and Helian Peng had wasted a lot of effort. Yili smiled faintly and said, "Since Helian Peng has this idea, it's clearly aimed at me. Let me deal with this rising general of the northern tribes." Mo Xiuyao thought for a moment before nodding and saying, "That's good. When He Su comes, let him follow you. Also, Yun Ting, Qin Yun, you too should follow Wang Fei." "Yes, Prince." Yun Ting and Qin Yun stepped out of the crowd and bowed in response. Yun Ting had been brought back by Yili from the Maoist army under Yonglin Murongshin. Qin Yun admired this young Wang Fei very much. Since Mo Xiuyao had ordered, the two naturally agreed happily. Yili nodded in agreement. The generals below looked at each other and had a deeper understanding of Yili's position. He Su was Princess Ding's shadow guard. Now, he had 300,000 soldiers in his hands. Compared to the other old generals of the Prince Ding mansion, he was not lacking at all. This time, he had followed Princess Ding to pacify the north. Prince still had He Su follow Wang Fei. It was clear that he wanted to give He Su and his soldiers to Wang Fei to control. He would become Princess Ding's trusted soldier. What was the most important thing in this world? Naturally, it was military power. Prince could even share military power with Wang Fei. What else could he not give? Right now, the Prince Ding mansion and the northern tribes were in a full-scale war. The entire battlefield stretched from Fei Hong Pass to the Chu capital. The entire battlefront took up more than half of the Dechu state's northern territory. Naturally, it could not be all around one place. The Maoist army was also divided into left, middle, and right. The right army was led by Yili and was stationed at Lingzhou Mountain near Fei Hong Pass. The left army was led by Lu Jingxian and was stationed at the city of Brisk, 100 li away from the Chu capital. Mo Xiuyao was in the middle army, guarding the Maoist army's middle camp. Therefore, Yili had just returned from the north and had to leave again after a few days of rest. If Yili was willing, she could stay in the camp with Mo Xiuyao. Even if Yili did nothing, the Maoist army would not have any complaints about this Wang Fei. But Yili did not want to do that. She did not go to the battlefield to gain the Mahist army's approval. She did it because she liked it. Even after a lifetime, the valiance of being born into a military family had never been erased. So everyone in the world felt that Ding Wangfei was a scholarly and talented woman on the outside, but her actions were more like a descendant of a general. Outside the Mo family army's barracks, Zhuo Jing, Qin Feng, and the others were standing far away. They were looking at the sky and the earth, but they didn't look at their wise and mighty Prince Ding, who looked down on the world. Lin Han looked at the sky and rubbed his nose. He signaled Qin Feng with his eyes. Are we leaving or not? It's getting dark. Qin Feng rubbed his nose and rolled his eyes. How would I know? Zhuo Jing looked down. If we can't leave today, we'll leave tomorrow. The prince and Wang Fei are not in a hurry, why should we be? Feng Zhiyao, who had come to send them off, looked awkwardly at a certain person. He decided that his relationship with Qin Feng and the others was better than his relationship with Princess Ding. Therefore, he should send them off. The four looked at each other expressionlessly, but they were all complaining in their hearts. What sin did I commit in my past life to be enslaved by this kind of person for half my life? If outsiders saw this, I would lose all my face. On the other side, Yili looked helplessly at a certain person who was looking at her. She sighed. Xiaoyao, I should go. Mo Xiaoyao said with some bitterness, Li just came back. Can't she stay with me in the army? I'll let Nan Ho go to Lingjiu Mountain for a while, okay? Yili said softly, we've already agreed on this. You can go back on your words. I will go back on my words. Mo Xiaoyao said confidently, I will order Nan Ho and his son to go to Lingjiu Mountain immediately. Yili looked at the sky and rolled her eyes. What's with this bad habit of acting like a spoiled child for no reason? She had never seen him act so strangely in front of others. Are you the same age as Mo Xiaobao? Mo Xiaobao doesn't go back on his words like you do. Be good, quickly defeat the northern tribes and everything will be fine. Mo Xiaoyao hugged her in his arms and said gloomily, Li lied to me. After defeating the northern tribes, there's still Enchanting and maybe Mo Jingli. Why won't they die? Mo Xiaoyao said gloomily as he buried his eyes in Yili's shoulder. Yili sighed softly, they will die. Stop messing around. I should go. Chapter 854. After much persuasion, Mo Xiaoyao finally let go of Yili. His expression was dark as he watched her get on the horse and leave. Standing at the side, Feng Zhiyao couldn't help but laugh in a low voice. Prince, it's not the first time Wang Fei has gone out. Is there a need to be so reluctant to part? Most importantly, you can change your image so casually. Not to mention your subordinates, even I, who grew up with you, find it hard to accept. Humph. If you have the time to joke around, why don't you hurry up and kill Yelu Yi for this king? Mo Xiaoyao indifferently glanced at Feng Zhiyao, snorted coldly, and left with a flick of his sleeve. There was no trace of the harmless appearance he had in front of Yili. Feng Zhiyao snorted. He held his chest and helplessly shook his head with a bitter smile. He really valued love over friendship. Even if he was angry, he didn't need to vent it on an innocent passerby like him. If you didn't want Wang Fei to leave, you shouldn't have agreed in the beginning. Feng Zhiyao cursed silently in his heart, but he could only follow helplessly. Who told him to be so unlucky to have made such a careless friend? Yili's group left the Mahist army's camp and quickly rode to the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp. This was not only the closest place to Feihong Pass, but also the closest place to the area controlled by Enchanting. Enchanting had hundreds of thousands of soldiers at the border. Even though West Hill was very busy right now, no one knew if Enchanting would intervene when the Mahist army and the northern tribes were fighting fiercely. The reason why Yili was personally stationed here was to prepare for any accidents that might happen. Spirit Vulture Mountain was more than 200 li from the Mahist army's camp. Even if Yili's group rode fast, they would only arrive at night. However, there were people guarding the camp, and old General Yuan Pei was at Feihong Pass, so Yili and the others were not in a hurry. The group of people rode on their horses, heading towards Spirit Vulture Mountain at a leisurely pace. When they reached a mountain stream, Qin Feng took the lead and pulled on the reins. The galloping horse was suddenly pulled by the reins. The horse neighed and reared up on its hind legs. It circled around in place for a few steps before coming to a stop. Yili and the others who were following behind him naturally stopped as well. "Who are you? Please show yourself," Qin Feng said loudly, his voice echoing strangely in the mountain stream. "Ha! Princess Ding, I've heard a lot about you. Now that I've met you today, you really do live up to your reputation." On the mountain road in front of them, a young man wearing a battle robe and holding a long saber appeared. He had a vigorous aura around him. He laughed heartily as he cupped his hands in greeting towards Yili. Yili frowned slightly. She patted her horse forward and smiled indifferently. "General Helian, nice to meet you." The smile on Helian Peng's face faded slightly. "Princess Ding has good eyesight." Yili smiled faintly. "Who else but General Helian would dare to lead troops to block the road under the control of my Mahist army? Did General Helian also bring your Yazi today?" Helian Peng's eyelids twitched when he heard Yili's words. Last time, he had underestimated the strength of the Mahist army, causing the people he sent out to be completely wiped out. Although he had only sent out a few dozen people to test the waters, it wasn't a glorious battle record to have them completely wiped out. He said in a low voice, "This one did indeed bring Yazi here. However, it seems that Princess Consort didn't bring Qi Lin with her. It's really regrettable. Does Princess Consort think that this place is under the control of the Mahist army and that there isn't the slightest bit of danger to run amok? How would this consort dare to have such thoughts? Even if I'm sitting at home, trouble will still come knocking. However, this consort can't possibly not even leave the house because of this, right? Wouldn't that be like giving up eating for fear of choking?" Yili said with a smile. Helian Peng looked thoughtfully at the white-clothed woman in front of him. Compared to the women of the northern tribes, the women of the Central Plains didn't look old. If she was in the northern tribes, Yili would look like she was only 17 or 18 years old. She was dressed in simple snow-white clothes and her black hair was casually tied up. Her snow-white clothes fluttered in the wind and her hair danced in the wind. She looked like the legendary snow goddess. "Since this one is here, I would like to invite Princess Consort to the northern tribes as a guest. I hope Princess Consort will do me the honor," Helian Peng said in a low voice. Hearing this, Qin Feng, Zhua Jing, and the others looked at Helian Peng with even more sinister and fierce gazes. Several people patted their horses and stepped forward to block Yili. When Helian Peng saw this, he didn't care. He laughed and waved his hand. A group of black-clothed people appeared on the mountain path. At a glance, there were more than 100 people. Helian Peng looked at Yili and said seriously, "I hope Princess Consort will do me the honor." Qin Feng laughed coldly and said, "You want to take Princess Consort away with just these few people? Your Excellency is too arrogant." "Oh." Helian Peng raised his eyebrows and glanced at Qin Feng and the others. "May I ask who these people are?" Naturally, he could tell that the aura of Qin Feng and the others were definitely not as simple as ordinary guards. It was a pity that the intelligence of the northern tribes was not as accurate as the Mahist army. They couldn't even recognize the few people that Yili trusted the most. Qin Feng said lightly, "General Helian doesn't have to worry about nameless people. However, if General Helian wants to invite Princess Consort over as a guest, you have to ask me first." Peng grinned and said, "Is that so? If that's the case, go." The men in black behind him received the order and immediately surrounded Yi Li and the others. Qin Feng, Lin Han and the others charged forward, while Zhuo Jing retreated to Yi Li's side and didn't make a move. The people that Yi Li brought out, including Qin Feng, Yun Ting, Chen Yun and the others, were only slightly more than 10 people. It was naturally difficult for them to fight against the hundreds of people under Peng. However, these people were the best of the best. They were able to hold their own against so many people and did not fall into a disadvantageous position. Seeing this, even Peng couldn't help but change his expression. He didn't know if these people were specially sent by Mo Xiuyao to protect Yi Li or if the Mahist army's fighting strength was so strong. If it was the latter, the Northern Tribes' army's ending would be worrying. As expected of the elites of the Mahist army, their skills are extraordinary. Peng praised loudly, "Princess Consort, no matter how strong your people are, I'm afraid they won't be able to defend against so many people. Why let your subordinates sacrifice themselves? This one is sincerely inviting Princess Consort to the Northern Tribes as a guest. Why won't Princess Consort give me face?" Peng's appearance wasn't considered handsome, but he had a valiant aura that was rarely seen in men of the Central Plains. However, he spoke such cultured words that gave people a strange feeling of incongruity. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "General Helian seems to be very interested in this consort's Qilin." Peng raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, "I'm ashamed to say this, but this one is very interested. Princess Consort was able to train such a mysterious troop that is even stronger than the Mahist army's trump card, the Black Cloud Cavalry. How can this one not be impressed? I wanted to ask Princess Consort for advice." Yi Li nodded and said, "Since it's like this, then this consort will tell you, Qilin, how to use it." Before he could finish his sentence, Yi Li waved her hand and a sharp whistling sound pierced through the air. A green flash shot into the sky and instantly bloomed into green fireworks in the sky. A moment later, a few places not far away also lit up with dark green flames. Chapter 855. Peng's face darkened and he said coldly, "Why is there Qilin here? Did Princess Consort predict that I would be waiting here?" The two fireworks were obviously the Mahist army responding to Yi Li's summons. The one who would do this was most likely Qilin. Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, "General, do you really think that I can predict things? Qilin's function is to be everywhere at any time. This is a battlefield. How can they be absent?" Peng laughed coldly. Compared to Qilin, his subordinate Yi was indeed not as good. But it didn't matter. "Then Princess Consort, why don't you see if they can save you in time?" Peng flew up and pounced towards Yi Li. What was surprising was that Peng was not like the other Northern Tribes people who only focused on external martial arts. On the contrary, he also practiced internal martial arts of the Central Plains, and it seemed that his internal martial arts were not shallow. At least, Yi Li could not see the depth of his internal martial arts. Zhuo Jing, who was beside Yi Li, leaped up and flew towards him. The two of them exchanged blows in the air. In a flash, they had exchanged more than 10 blows before both of them landed on the ground. Zhuo Jing's face darkened. Peng's martial arts were beyond his expectations. If it was under normal circumstances, he would have a chance of winning if he teamed up with Qin Feng and Lin Han. But now, it was impossible. Peng was very confident in his own martial arts. He had fought with the Mahist army several times before and had not met a worthy opponent, even though Mo Xiuyao did not make a move. He did not expect that he would be stopped by an inconspicuous bodyguard. Peng laughed coldly and praised, "Good martial arts." Zhuo Jing was silent and stared calmly at Peng. Peng snorted and laughed. Unfortunately, it's still not enough. He ignored Jing and once again pounced towards Yili. How could Jing let him succeed? He flew up to block him. On the other side, Yili had also jumped down from her horse's back at the same time. The dagger in her hand flashed, and stabbed towards Peng's chest. Peng exclaimed in surprise. He raised his hand to grab Yili's wrist. However, he saw Yili turn her wrist and slash at his wrist. In just a split second, Peng clearly saw the dagger in Yili's hand. It wasn't an ordinary dagger, but a tri-chested sharp awl. There was even a blood groove on it. If one was pierced by it, even if they didn't die, they would lose half their life. Peng retreated and said with a smile, "Princess Ding is really ruthless." Although Yili was a woman, she was not afraid of anyone when it came to close combat. It was just that he started cultivating his inner strength too late, so he couldn't achieve great success in it. Now that they were engaged in close combat, there wasn't much use of internal energy. Although Peng was powerful, he was still far from being able to control his inner strength as he wished. Jing naturally wouldn't let Yili fight alone. He flew up with a long sword, which was extremely sharp. The sword's aura was overwhelming. The two of them, one from afar and the other from close combat, cooperated well. For a moment, Peng couldn't do anything. Peng knew that if he wanted to capture Yili, he had to get rid of Jing first. However, with Yili here, he couldn't free himself to get rid of Jing. Jing wasn't a good-for-nothing who could be easily defeated by him. Therefore, he could only focus on attacking Yili. As long as he hurt Yili first, he would naturally be free to get rid of Jing. After making up his mind, Peng unsheathed the long sword in his hand. He waved the sword and distanced himself from Yili. The long sword danced vigorously in the air, heading towards Yili. Yili knew that her strength was far inferior to Peng's. She didn't welcome the attack and retreated. Jing moved forward to block Peng's long sword. Yili appeared behind him and stabbed the short sword in her hand towards Peng. Peng had been waiting for this moment. He waved the long sword in his hand with all his strength. Even Jing was shaken off by the strong aura of his sword. However, Yili, who should have been more seriously injured than Jing, seemed to ignore the sword aura and continued to advance towards Peng. Yili's movements were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, the short sword in her hand had stabbed into Peng's body. Peng didn't have time to be surprised at how Yili could resist his strength. His face was already distorted by the intense pain in his body. Jing, who had retreated to one side, waved the long whip in his hand and pulled Yili back. Peng steadied himself. When he saw the wounds on his body, he gasped. Although he had dodged a few of them quickly, the broken sword had only pierced through his arm. However, it could be predicted that this arm would not be able to move for the next 2 to 3 months. If it had really pierced his body, even if it had not hit a vital part, he was afraid that no matter how strong his internal energy was, only death would await him. "Princess Consort, you have good skills." Peng stared at Yili, his expression changing. Yili's expression was calm as she said lightly, "General Helian, you flatter me." Generals' martial arts are extremely rare among the people of the northern tribes. Peng did not hide it. He smiled and said, "That's right. This one's martial arts were indeed taught by an expert from the Central Plains." Peng casually pulled out a long cloth and wrapped the bleeding wound as he spoke with a smile. "It's not just an expert. This consort knows a few experts from the Central Plains." Peng smiled and said, "I am ashamed to say this. My master just happened to die at the hands of Prince Ding." Yili frowned slightly and muttered to herself for a moment, "Murong Xiong." died at the hands of Mo Xiuyao. Only Murong Xiong would be able to teach such an expert. Moreover, Helian Peng's martial arts were indeed somewhat similar to Murong Xiong's. Helian Peng smiled but did not say anything. He neither admitted nor denied it. Yili did not mind and said lightly, "General Helian, it's best if you quickly return. Bleeding from an arm can still cause death." Although Helian Peng had bandaged the wound on his arm, it clearly could not stop the bleeding. Not long after, the entire cloth was dyed blood red. Helian Peng laughed bitterly and raised his hand to seal a few more acupuncture points. Just as he was about to speak, he saw a few cold lights flash through the forest in the distance. Several feathered arrows shot towards them. Not far from him, several men in black fell to the ground after being hit by the arrows. Helian Peng's expression changed, they came so quickly. Retreat. Chapter 856. When Helian Peng saw that Qi Lin had arrived and that he was heavily injured, he knew that he would not be able to gain any advantage today. After saying that he was going to retreat, he flew away from the mountain stream, not caring about the lives of the people he brought with him. With the addition of the Qilin, these people were naturally taken care of by everyone without much effort. Qin Feng looked in the direction that Helian Peng left and said regretfully, "It's a pity that Helian Peng escaped." Lin Han, who was following behind him, looked at the dead or injured Northern Tribe soldiers and said, "Helian Peng is really ruthless. He sent so many people to their deaths just like that." Helian Peng did not feel any heartache when he threw away the dozens of people from a few days ago and the 100 people today. These people were different from the normal Northern Tribe soldiers. Every one of them had been specially trained for a long time. Even Helian Peng did not have many such experts. From this, it could be seen that Yili and Helian Peng treated their subordinates differently. Qi Lin had been established for many years and the number of casualties was only slightly more than 100. However, Helian Peng could easily kill more than 100 people with just one or two moves. It was obvious that Helian Peng did not treat these people as his elite trump cards or even his own subordinates. At most, they were just some high-level cannon fodder. Shui Jing was the closest and saw the situation clearly. He said in a low voice, "Even if we did not kill him, Helian Peng would not be able to jump around for a month or two. Wang Fei, do you want to send someone?" Yili shook her head and said, "Helian Peng's martial arts are not weak. Even if he is not as good as the prince, he should not be weaker than Ren Qining. Furthermore, he is the general of the northern tribes. Now that he is injured, there should be guards around him. There is no need to send people to their deaths. Let's go to Spirit Vulture Mountain first." "Yes, Princess," everyone replied. Some people were left to clean up the battlefield while the rest escorted Yili to Spirit Vulture Mountain. The news of Yili being blocked by Helian Peng naturally couldn't be hidden from Mo Xiuyao. Although Yili wasn't injured, Mo Xiuyao's expression was extremely ugly. Even Feng Zhiyao and Han Mingxi, who were usually the most talkative, didn't dare to open their mouths so as to avoid provoking Mo Xiuyao. Mo Xiuyao snorted with a gloomy expression. He picked up his incineration sword and left the camp. Seeing this, Feng Zhiyao and the others were stunned. After a long while, Han Mingxi asked somewhat blankly, What is he going to do?" Feng Zhiyao blinked his eyes and joked, "You're not going to kill Helian Peng, right?" Han Mingyue, who was sitting beside Han Mingxi, nodded and said, "He is indeed going to kill Helian Peng. Who knows, Yilu Yi and Helian Zhen might also be there." Although Feng Zhiyao didn't trust Han Mingyue for a long time, he still had some confidence in his ability and scheming. If it wasn't for Su Zuidi, why would Han Mingyue be like this? Hearing him say this, Feng Zhiyao immediately jumped up and exclaimed, "Is he crazy? That is an army of hundreds of thousands. If he alone can slaughter the entire northern tribe's army, then what is the point of fighting? There is a limit to a person's strength. Even if Mo Xiuyao's martial arts were the best in the world, able to fight against 10, 1 against 100, 1 against 1,000, 1 against 10,000, 1 against 10,000. If he wanted to charge into the army camp and kill Helianpeng and Yilu Yi, Feng Zhiyao only had 2 words for him: "You're courting death." After a moment of shock, Feng Zhiyao finally jumped up and rushed out while shouting, "Mo Xiuyao, I owe you in my past life. Men! Gather the men." In the large tent, only Han Mingxi and Han Mingyue, the 2 brothers, were left. Han Mingxi looked at Han Mingyue and asked in disbelief, "Big brother, does Mo Xiuyao really plan to kill Helianpeng?" Even if he wanted to kill him, there was no need to charge into the northern tribe's camp. He could find an opportunity to wait until Helianpeng was alone or out of the camp. With Mo Xiuyao's martial arts, he could kill several Helianpengs. Han Mingyue smiled bitterly and said, "How could Prince Ding not think of what you can think of?" Han Mingxi didn't understand, then why is he doing this? After today, as long as Mo Xiuyao doesn't die, I'm afraid that no one in this world will dare to have designs on Yili. Han Mingyue sighed. He had once thought that Mo Xiuyao was deeply in love with Su Zuidi, and even secretly thought that Mo Xiuyao didn't understand love. Only now did he understand that it wasn't that Mo Xiuyao didn't understand love, it was just that he hadn't met the right person. What Mo Xiuyao did for Yili, Han Mingyue admitted that he couldn't do it. Reaching out to pat his somewhat absent-minded brother, Han Mingyue turned and walked out. Inside the tent, Han Mingxi was silent for a long time. Finally, he smiled bitterly and a trace of relief flashed across his face. What Mo Xiuyao could do, he would never be able to do. It wasn't about ability, it was about temperament. He would never be able to do such a thing for a person, even if he loved her. This day could be said to be an unforgettable day for all the northern tribe soldiers. Of course, that was if they had eternal life. Because the 2 armies didn't engage in battle these few days, the northern tribe's camp had a rare moment of peace. However, it was precisely in this type of calm that the soldiers guarding the entrance to the camp watched as a silver-haired man dressed in snow-white clothes drifted over like a white cloud. Before the soldiers at the door could react to this sudden scene, they only felt a light on their necks. The man in white's cold, scarlet eyes was the last thing they saw in this world. Mo Xiuyao barged into the camp, taking advantage of the fact that the northern tribe's soldiers had yet to react. He rushed towards the general's tent. His qigong was extremely high, and along the way, the sword qi of the incineration sword scattered, causing countless casualties. Even the unlucky ones who became his stepping stones were shaken to death by the force of his footsteps. Instantly, the camp was in chaos. Countless soldiers rushed towards Mo Xiuyao. The soldiers who reacted quickly shot arrows at him, but how could normal arrows hit Mo Xiuyao? Furthermore, it was fine if he was in the air, but once he landed on the ground, it was hard to say if the arrows would hit Mo Xiuyao or their own men. In a moment, the white-robed figure flashed in and out of the camp. Everywhere he went, blood flowed like a river. No one was lucky enough to survive the incineration sword. Every time he swung his sword, blood would flow. With such power, even the northern tribe's soldiers who were known for their bravery couldn't help but feel terrified. They were afraid that if they were careless, they would die without a doubt. With such a huge commotion in the camp, how could Yilu Yi, who was sitting in the commander's tent, not know? Yilu Yi was furious that Helianpeng had returned with injuries, but when he heard the commotion outside the camp, he couldn't help but be enraged. Just then, the soldiers outside panicked and reported that someone had barged into the camp. Yilu Yi laughed coldly. I would like to see who dares to barge into the northern tribe's camp. The moment he brought Helianjin and Helianping out, he saw Mo Xiuyao, dressed in white and holding a sword, walking over. That dull ancient sword was glowing with a bloody light, its killing intent soaring to the heavens. Mo Xiaoyao. Yilu Yi was shocked and angry. He couldn't understand why this fiend would come to the northern tribe's camp at this time. Could it be that Mo Xiaoyao suddenly felt that as long as he killed him, he would be able to resolve this battle? Chapter 857. Anyone with a little experience would know that a war between countries was not something that could be resolved with the death of one or two commanders. Moreover, how difficult was it to assassinate the commander of an army? Even if Mo Xiaoyao killed him, how could Yilu Yi guarantee that he would be able to leave alive? Mo Xiaoyao, who was in the midst of killing, also saw Yilu Yi and the other two. With a cold smile, he waved his sword and charged towards Yilu Yi. Looking at the blood-colored sword, Yilu Yi's expression changed. Sword of incineration. Beside him, Helianjin's face had already turned black. If Mo Xiaoyao managed to escape after charging into the northern tribe's camp alone, the northern tribes would be in deep trouble. With a cold snort, Helianjin brandished the long saber in his hand and charged towards Mo Xiaoyao. Yilu Yi had the same idea as Helianjin. Seeing Helianjin make a move, he also charged forward without hesitation. Since Mo Xiaoyao had come here himself, if they could kill him, it would be a good thing for the northern tribes. More importantly, if they could kill Mo Xiaoyao, their status in the royal house of the northern tribes could be said to be unshakable. Mo Xiaoyao, you've got guts, you're really arrogant. Yilu Yi said coldly. Seeing the two attacking, Mo Xiaoyao did not reply, only smiling coldly. The sword in his hand cut through the air like a ray of light, emitting a cold sword aura. Helianpeng was already injured, but at this time he stood to the side and watched. When he saw Helianjin and Yilu Yi fighting Mo Xiaoyao, he knew that the two of them had no chance of winning. Mo Xiaoyao's martial arts were too weak compared to the two of them. Not to mention competing, the two of them did not even have the qualifications to be mentioned in the same breath as him. Lowering his head to look at the wound on his arm, he thought of the beautiful white-clothed girl who looked like a snow mountain saintess. A trace of coldness flashed through Helianpeng's eyes. He raised his hand to summon the guard beside him and whispered a few words. The guard nodded and turned to leave. Watching Helianjin and Yilu Yi struggling under his sword, Mo Xiaoyao revealed a mocking smile. He turned his gaze to Helianjin and swung his sword without hesitation. This sword strike did not have the slightest intention of showing any mercy. When Helianjin saw the earth-shattering energy, he knew that it was not something he could withstand. But Mo Xiaoyao gave up on Yilu Yi and only targeted him. He had nowhere to hide. He could only use all his strength to raise his saber to block Mo Xiaoyao's sword. With a loud bang, the long saber that was made of fine iron and weighed over 100 kilograms shattered into pieces. The incineration sword in Mo Xiaoyao's hand did not slow down in the slightest as it continued to slash towards Helianjin's head. Helianjin was a famous general of the northern tribes. 18 years ago, he had been defeated by Mo Xiaoyao. 18 years later, he had finally regrouped with great difficulty and wanted to make a comeback. But before he could achieve anything, he was about to become a ghost under Mo Xiaoyao's sword. Seeing Helianjin's suddenly widened eyes filled with fear and shock, Mo Xiaoyao's eyes flashed with a cold and bloodthirsty smile. Die! Bang! It seemed very slow, but in reality, it happened in the blink of an eye. The other saber blocked Mo Xiaoyao's thunderous sword strike. Helianjin was also grabbed by Yilu Yi and pulled to the side. Although they avoided death, everyone present was still in a state of shock. They saw Helianpeng holding a large saber that glowed with a faint golden light. But at this time, the saber had already been broken into two halves. Helianpeng's hand holding the saber was trembling uncontrollably. Even the wound on his other arm that was originally bandaged was once again frozen and cracked. It was clear that in order to save Heartwarming, he had used all his strength to block the attack. The surging internal energy in his body had actually caused his wound to reopen. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his eyes, his expression indifferent as he looked at the incineration sword in his hand. After a while, he raised his head to look at Heartwarming and said, "Good martial arts. Murong Xiong's disciple." If Heartwarming did not say it, Yili would not have been able to see through Heartwarming's background. But Mo Xiaoyao had only exchanged blows with Heartwarming once, and he had clearly seen through his martial arts. He sneered, "It seems that killing Murong Xiong at that time was not an injustice." Heartwarming was clearly not interested in the fact that Mo Xiaoyao was his enemy who had killed his master. He gripped the short saber in his hand and said in a low voice, "Not as good as Prince Ding." "What does Prince Ding mean by today's actions?" "What do I mean?" Mo Xiaoyao's smile was somewhat strange as he looked at him and said, "You guys don't know what I mean." Yi let go of Heartwarming's hand and stood beside Heartwarming, saying in a low voice, "Mo Xiaoyao, don't think that just because your martial arts are strong that I am afraid of you. This prince doesn't believe that you alone can do anything to this prince in the midst of an army of 10,000. Mo Xiaoyao sneered and said, "If you don't know, then I'll tell you. Anyone who dares to have any ideas about Li will all die." The incineration sword released a dangerous brilliance. Mo Xiaoyao casually waved it, and the flags in the camp not far away fell to the ground. The muscles at the corner of Heartwarming's eyes twitched. He casually wiped off the trace of blood from the corner of his lips and sneered. "I would like to see just how formidable Prince Ding is." With a wave of his hand, countless black-clothed men surged out from every corner of the camp and charged towards Mo Xiaoyao. These people were all personally trained by Heartwarming, and their skills were not too far off from Qilin. The northern tribes people were naturally bloodthirsty. At this time, the entire camp was being slaughtered by Mo Xiaoyao, and blood flowed like a river. This aroused the killing intent in their hearts. One by one, they charged towards Mo Xiaoyao without hesitation. They were truly unafraid of death. Mo Xiaoyao let out a long whistle, and his white-clothed figure turned into a white ray of light as he shot towards the crowd. Everywhere he went, blood splattered everywhere, and countless broken limbs were left behind. Although Yi had temporarily trapped Mo Xiaoyao, the expressions of Heartwarming, Yi, and the others, who were watching the battle from the side, were even more unsightly. Heartwarming had already lost a lot of blood, and just now, he had suffered internal injuries from Mo Xiaoyao. His face was pale, and his eyes were filled with gloominess. Although Heartwarming didn't cherish these specially trained subordinates as much as Yili did, these people were still different from ordinary soldiers. Even Heartwarming only had a little over 1,000 people under his command. Previously, because of Yili, he had lost over 100 people. At the very least, he had managed to find out some information about Yili. But now, in the blink of an eye, close to 100 people had been killed by Mo Xiaoyao. How could Heartwarming's expression not be ugly? Heartwarming said with a cold expression, "No matter what, we cannot let Mo Xiaoyao leave this place today." The threat that Mo Xiaoyao gave him was too great. If it was said that Mo Xiaoyao, who was still a teenager 18 years ago, made him feel that his failure was only because he was too careless and unreconciled, then today's meeting completely overturned Heartwarming's thoughts. The current Mo Xiaoyao was definitely not someone he could deal with. Just now, he had only been a hair's breadth away from death. Even 18 years ago, he had not felt such a feeling of death. Since he could not defeat Mo Xiaoyao, then he had to kill him by hook or by crook. The northern tribe's soldiers who were watching from the side were also shocked by the bloody scene. The current scene was even more impactful than on the battlefield. On the battlefield, everyone was fighting with their lives on the line. No matter how desperate the situation was, no one had the time to care about it. But now, they could only watch on helplessly, as this could be called a one-sided massacre. Those black-clothed men, who were usually very powerful in the eyes of these ordinary soldiers, were like wooden chickens and pottery dogs in front of this white-clothed, white-haired man, unable to withstand a single blow. The snowy rain fell on Imo Xiaoyao's snow-white clothes, adding a hint of killing intent to his cold and bloodthirsty handsome face. It was as if he was a blood-soaked Azura from hell.